It'll be there, it'll be on the laptop. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Steve. We will begin in 1 hour. Happy New Year. Good morning. Thank you for being here and braving the roads. Welcome to the 32nd annual Southwest Economic Outlook. And it's at this point in our program where I acknowledge Dr. Wabakin for being here now for his 32nd talk. So thank you, Mitch. Sorry for the delay. We had a little technical issue that we got sorted out. On your tables, I just want to point out there is an agenda for the morning's events, and on the back is a QR code. Every year, Dr. Wabakin sends over dozens upon dozens of books for the economic outlook, and they go super fast. And so there's a QR code on the back of the agenda. If you scan that code, it will get you a PDF of the book. So if you didn't get a book, in years past, half of you would have emailed me tomorrow. Now, take this. I want to thank our regional elected officials for being here. I know the roads are not phenomenal, so thank you for making the trip in. Also, our college leadership, thank you for being here. We do have a new provost, and I saw him. There he is. I want to give Mario Martinez, Dr. Martinez, a welcome. Thank you for being here for your first. You now have 32 more to come to. Thank you for being here. I want to thank Physical Plant for getting campus. You should have seen it the other day. It was rough. So thank you to everyone at Physical Plant. Thank you to everyone in IT. I want to give a quick shout out to the Economic Alliance. I see Mike is here. Mike, thank you. Mike and his staff at the Alliance gave some very helpful data to Dr. Peach, Janae Peach, so thank you for that. I want to give a huge thank you to Pat Flores and Lexi Allman over there for helping get everything set up and organized. This would not have come together without all of these people's assistance. Where's Dr. Chesser? Dr. Chester, thank you for being here. Dr. Chester brought some information that's on a table by the entrance about the Impact Career Innovation Center. So on your way out, or if you get up and walk around, please feel free to grab some of that information. This is usually when I go through some slides. Oh. Good morning, my name is Stephen Elias. I'm Dean of the Katz School of Business. This is usually when I would go through some slides and talk about all the great things that have gone on over the last year in the business school. And this year, I am just going to say we continue to do amazing things, our faculty, our staff, and our students. And while Mark and Jane Katz are not here, they're in Montana, I just want to publicly acknowledge their tremendous support for the business school, transformational gift, to name the school, the Katz School of Business. So I will leave it at that in the interest of time, but thank you, Katz family, for all of your support. This is the second year of having Bank of Colorado as our sponsor for this event. We are absolutely thrilled to be working with Bank of Colorado. I've gotten to know Jason Ports extraordinarily well over the last few years, and we get together every now and then for therapy sessions or whatever you want to call them. But they're highly enjoyable and productive, and thank you for that. And I also want, where's Melissa Jackson Palmer? Thank you, Melissa, for all of your assistance. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason in the interest of time. Thank you all for being here and braving the elements in the cold weather. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you, Steve. I think we've got a quick video to show Pat.
I have a little too much job security, sorry.
We are snow.
All right, here we go.
We are snowy peaks and grassy plains, flowing rivers and crystal lakes. We are friends, family, and relationships in our hearts, but also in the way we do business. We know you by name, make time for you, and support you in times when you need it most. We are always local, even when you find us statewide, or when our routes grow past our borders from New Mexico into Arizona. We're a family-owned business making a big impact with community investments, meaningful partnerships, and a persistent desire to build timeless relationships with our customers. We are driven by many things, but there's only one thing that defines us. One mindset, one mission. Always doing the right thing through purpose-driven action, one customer at a time. And giving our customers faster, more reliable support when they need it. Because when it comes to community, we're nothing without it. So wherever you call home, from Durango to Fort Collins, the Western Slope to the Eastern Plains, we'll be there. Always committed to doing the right thing and supporting your one-of-a-kind community like there's only one. Bank of Colorado, there's only one.
Thank you all for coming and braving the weather. I was told I needed to start off with a joke. So where does the snowman keep his money? A snowbank. So last night when I was trying to figure out what to say besides a bad joke, one word kept coming to mind, and that was the word fortunate. And I'm extremely fortunate to work for Bank of Colorado, a privately held, family-owned bank with local decision-making that believes in giving back to our community. We have a lot of our leadership team here locally. I'd ask all of you to stand up from Bank of Colorado. I'm extremely fortunate to work with all of these folks and call them my teammates. they all give back to our community with their time and their money. So very fortunate to have a great team. Additionally, looking at our involvement with Fort Lewis College, we're as a community extremely fortunate to have Fort Lewis College in our community. What it gives to our community, the economic impacts. This is an economic outlook, and it's tremendous what it brings, but it goes far beyond that. Fortunate to have Steve Elias, Melissa Mount, Mario Martinez, Tom Sturdicus. We're fortunate to have Nathan Peach come back for a second year and present. We had tremendous feedback after last year's economic outlook from Nathan. Really excited to bring him back for a second year. Really fortunate in this community to have quality healthcare resources and providers. At 10 o'clock, we'll be hearing from our local hospitals and healthcare providers. We got Brandon Mancini from Mercy Hospital, Megan Roberts from Animas Surgical Hospital, Joe Thine from Southwest Memorial, Shelley Berg from Access Health. I got the opportunity to have dinner with these folks last night, and as a community, we're extremely fortunate to have these leaders who genuinely care about our community and want to have a positive impact. Fortunate that in August, I was able to attend a health conference and meet Josh Ewing with Colorado Health Association, and he's going to be able to present, and fortunate that he had the time to be able to come to Durango and present to us all. And then last but not least, extremely fortunate to be able to introduce our first presenter at his 32nd year, Dr. Rich Waugan from the CU Lead School of Business.
All right, it's great to be here, and I'm checking the schedule, and I'm done. Obviously, just kidding. Thank you so much for inviting me back, Steve and Katz School of Business. Certainly, the sponsorship of Bank of Colorado, really very much appreciated. As has been mentioned already, you have access to the booklet through the QR or through copies that we brought with us. I would draw your attention to pages 158 to 161, which are written about this part of the state and are generously contributed by Donna Graves from Information Services, Inc., and also by Laura Lewis Marchino and Heather Otter from Region 9. So we thank them very much for their participation. And one of the things about the booklet is over 130 people contributed to putting this booklet together in terms of the different sectors and so on. So there's a lot of great information in the booklet. Let me say I was really nervous. I'm always really nervous when I talk, but I was really worried about, I'm going to say things are a little bit slower. I'm going to depress the audience. And, I love coming here and occasionally, like this time, I bring a lot of snow with me, which people are really happy about. So I really enjoyed my time down here, and I was worried about maybe depressing you a little bit. And then I saw, Steve sent me the program, and I saw that we had like 2 hours of healthcare, and nothing I can do can be as depressing as 2 hours of healthcare. You'll hear me say this a lot, but we're looking at a situation where there's so much uncertainty, and I said the same thing last year in terms of the macro economy. Well, when you look at this in terms of what they're facing and how rapid the changes in that industry and all of the different issues that you're going to hear about, it is an extremely challenging area. I'm personally really looking forward to the discussion that they have with us today. So with that in mind, and me actually setting the timer so I don't go crazy long, this is our sort of discussion about the macro economy up front, and then I'm going to talk about the state economy, and then you're going to get to hear from Nate Peach on the local economy and some of his views on some of the bigger macro indicators. So we're going to have a tag team sort of presentation over the next hour or so. So looking at this, where are we? Well, I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's totally surprised us that GDP growth has been as strong as it's been. We went into the year expecting a slower rate of GDP growth. It looks like it's going to end the year at about 2.3%. No one was predicting GDP growth for the year over 2% going in. I haven't found a single forecaster looking back a year ago that was projecting that. And with that strength of GDP growth, at least nationally, you can say that the employment numbers have held up better than expected in the higher interest rate environment. So this is sort of a good thing. I will then say going forward, almost everybody is calling for significantly slower growth throughout 2024. And you will see that our state forecast sort of reflects a slower national economy, and more details about that later. So there's just so many things out there, right? Every week we get new information coming out, and some things are positive and some things are negative and some things are going sort of sideways. And these are the sort of big indicator pieces that we look at when we're talking about when we actually having a recession. So, people are always asking that question, although the probability has gone down significantly. And frankly, people asking has gone down significantly. But these are the types of key indicators you look at when you're talking about recession in the economy. But this is the slide that should scare you. This is our risks, probability and severity kinds of, the likelihood it'll happen and the severity it could be. And this is adopted from some work some things we subscribe to from Moody's, but the 3 or 4 that are in dark red are ones that are particularly of concern to us when we're doing our macro forecast. So we're looking at this and we're concerned about the debt ceiling and how that relates to basically the level of debt in the economy. That's one of our big concerns. Certainly the unwinding of the commercial real estate situation. Still getting along with working from home. This is a huge thing, and it sort of relates to the commercial real estate piece, but it also relates to downtown business for a lot of the major, I shouldn't even say major cities. I could say it for Fort Collins, I could say it for Boulder, but you certainly see it in Denver. It's had an impact on downtown business. And then, is the consumer still able to stay at the table? Consumption growth in the economy, because the consumer is the one that has actually kept the economy as afloat at the level we've seen now. So looking at some of this pictures, let me start with employment at the national level. And you can see we are way above where we were pre-COVID, 5 million jobs above. But my argument is, had we stayed on trend from pre-COVID, we would have another 2 or 3 million jobs in the economy right now. So even though the numbers are impressive, we aren't on what would have been historical trend. And of course, you can sit there and you'll say, well, Rich, the unemployment rate's really low, and where would these people come from? And those are very legitimate questions. But the answer is, maybe so many people wouldn't have left the workforce. So I might have joked about this last year, I don't really remember, but going into COVID, there were at least 10 faculty members older than me in our faculty, and now all of a sudden I'm the old guy. Everybody bailed on the damn place, and I'm left standing there. Sorry, shouldn't say that. The darn place. But anyway, it's just like crazy. Like all of a sudden, like people like, oh, here's our senior statesman. It's like, anyway. More later, but we lost a lot of people, especially in that age bracket, 55 and above. We lost a lot of people from the workforce, and they've been slow to come back at this point. So one interesting thing is, if you look at this employment number, compared to pre-COVID, and you say, what types of jobs are growing or not growing? You can see retail is at about the same level it was going into the COVID recession. Manufacturing's up, total employment, wholesale employment, but the one that's growing the fastest is office employment. So tying that back to my earlier comment, our highest growth rate are office-related types of jobs, but we're not seeing the occupancy of the office space. So it shows you the real impact in trying to understand the working from home and that whole piece in terms of commuting and flexibility. Right now, if we didn't offer people flexibility, we would be losing workforce. I mean, there's just no question in this environment that we're in right now. So we have some of that, and some jobs obviously can't do that, but more about that as we go along. So one of the things we're again focusing on is to say, okay, we need more workers, there's a labor shortage. We had this incredible gap that occurred after COVID, where we had we had at one point 2 jobs open for every 1 unemployed person in the economy. And the Fed has been trying to close that gap by slowing the economy down with these higher interest rate movements. And now, as you can see on the left-hand graphic, we're down to 1.4 to 1. So it has gotten quite a bit better, but still there's a gap and still there's a labor shortage. And you typically wouldn't think of a recession. People kept saying it's going to be a recession. You don't really think of a recession where you have an unemployment rate that's under 4%. It's almost unheard of to have a recession with an unemployment rate under 4%. So this is one of the things that's, a little bit complex, confusing, or let's just leave it at confusing. You look at the right-hand one, and this was one of the places that we thought we would gain jobs back. When we went into the COVID recession, we had, well over 8 million people were holding 2 jobs, multiple job holders. So they're working at a restaurant, in one restaurant at lunch and a different restaurant at dinner, or they're working in a hotel and then they're working in a restaurant, or other types of jobs. Obviously they could be doing as well, but they're holding 2 jobs. And maybe by necessity, or maybe by just, want to get ahead kinds of things, but we have seen that slowly come back since COVID. And now you can see we actually have more people than pre-COVID that are holding 2 jobs at this particular point in time. So that's some of the way we can fill some of that labor shortage. But still, this morning, the National Federation of Independent Business came out with their monthly survey. And the number one thing that was on their participants' minds is inflation. And number 2 is labor shortage. They can't find people, and they can't find people with the right qualifications. So labor shortage continues to be a critical element in the process. When looking at, a couple of quick comments on personal income. It has risen fairly dramatically, all of the components. Transfer payments, you can see in the bottom right-hand side, included the tax checks that we got, the first Trump check and the second President Trump check, and then the President Biden check. You can see those real big bumps. But now that has come back down to sort of a level plane, but you can see that level plane is quite a bit higher than it was pre-COVID, the first 3 bars that you see in that dark blue on the bottom right-hand side. So this is an area where we get some of this consternation or concern that's coming out of Washington about debt ceiling and fiscal responsibility, and are we doing too much with transfer payments? Some of that's showing up in the actual data. One of our concerns has been that we started to see very low savings rates back in 2023. We started to see the savings rate, which is in the bottom graphic. We saw 2022 and all the way to the beginning of 2023 having negative savings, month-over-month savings. Now we've started to see that bounce back up, but still it's at pretty historically low levels. So when you look at the sort of overall financial position of the economy, you start to say, well, maybe the savings rates are a little low for where we want to go. So where has that money gone? Well, here's where it went. We thought we were consumers before the COVID, but now we're really consumers. We're on a whole different trajectory of how much of our income we're spending on products. So the green line appears to be this new trend line or forecast line that we've been running that is indicating the current level of spending in terms of national retail sales. And we have seen a little bit of slowing more recently, but still retail sales have been very strong. And that's part of the reason, or significant part of the reason, why GDP has been as high as it's been. What could be supporting that? Well, in addition to the employment growth and personal income growth that I showed you already, you could certainly be getting some of that from household wealth. So people, their houses have gone up in value, or their stock portfolios have gone up in value. But as you know, in the last year and a half or so, we haven't seen that kind of strength in the housing market for sure, but also we saw a dip in 2022 in the stock market. So we have seen this, significant rise in household wealth, but more recently, over the past, say, 5 quarters, not so much. So then you look at the sort of debt burden and you say, well, maybe it's people taking on a lot more debt. But they're not taking on a lot more debt so far, and at least in terms of how much of their income they're using to service debt, we're seeing that that percentage is staying, fairly close to what it was pre-COVID. It has bounced up from the depths of the COVID recession, but it's certainly manageable. And if you compare it back to, say, 2007 or 2008, before the global financial crisis, you can see that it is much lower in terms of how much people are spending monthly on their on debt. So just as a quick sidebar, and let me slow down for just a second. When we're talking about this slide, we're talking about how much money each month is committed out of the entire amount of income in the US, how much is committed to making monthly payments. Student loans, mortgage payments, car payments, credit card payments, any sort of credit is being reflected in these graphics. They measure them slightly differently, but they're tracking the same thing. So you can see, as a percentage at least of disposable income or after-tax income, that is really not in a particularly bad place. I should also make another caveat. That slide is an average. So that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are struggling much more to make monthly credit payments. And in fact, that is the setup for this next slide, where we talk about loan delinquencies. So this is quarterly data that we get from the Consumer Credit Panel. It's very reliable data, but as you can see, we're only up to Q3 on this particular graphic. And in Q3, you can start to see the very top line, credit card, has started to accelerate fairly significantly in terms of 90-day plus delinquency by in that loan type. I can tell you the more micro data for the last couple of months, we're also seeing a significant rise in auto loan delinquencies at this point as well. So we're starting to see what I would call stressors in the system, or cracks in the system. Auto loans, credit cards, and people who are buying more on that kind of credit. And if that wasn't enough, we just had a record-setting on e-commerce holiday season, November 1 through the end of December. And of that, over 16 billion were 16.6 billion were bought on buy now, pay later types of activities. So people know what that is, right? It shows up every time I'm on buying anything. It says, you want to do this through this company on buy now, pay later? So that's another form, again, of credit, and people exercise that a lot during the holiday season. Quick comments on inflation. Nate's going to speak to this as well. So obviously it has come down. It has been better, if you will, in terms of consumer price inflation. And part of that we focus on is underlying is the consumer, is the producer prices on the right-hand side of this graphic. And they came down dramatically, then they bounced up a little bit, but still, they're really, in terms of the production side of the economy, we've seen a much more of a stabilization, which is good news. And that helps to contribute to the overall, consumer price index coming down. But I also have to say, this is focused on materials, and what the Fed is really concerned with, and what we're really focused on, is sort of labor inflation in the economy as well. And one of the things that came out of the jobs report last Friday was that year over year labor prices or wages were up over 4%. So the Fed's trying to get to a 2% inflation target. They're linking that to how much are wages going up, because that's how much people can afford to spend on things. And I suspect last Friday's number of over 4% was not something that made them smile particularly. Probably raised actually some levels of concern. So here we have the US city average, and then the mountain, and then Denver Aurora Lakewood, which is the proxy for Colorado, although, as you know, your prices are different here than Denver Aurora Lakewood. But what you see, and what has been historically true, 11 of the last 13 years, Denver Aurora Lakewood, or the Colorado proxy, has had a higher rate of inflation than the nation as a whole. And you can see the most recent one. This is through November. This is through November. We don't have year-end data yet. But when you look at this, you can see the US city average a little over 3%, which a lot of people were very happy about. And then you see Denver, Aurora, Lakewood at 4.5%. And I would call your attention, I'm pretty sure I did this last year as well for repeat attenders or offenders, depending on what you think of the presentation. But if you see the right-hand column, you can see that there are three components that really contribute very heavily to the consumer price index. The food and beverages, the second line down, is 14.4. Housing is 44.4. And then transportation, including fuel, broader than fuel, but including gasoline and fuel and so on, and that's 16.7. So you have 75% basically in those three categories. And housing continues to outpace the nation in Colorado, even with the slowing, year-over-year sort of slowing. We still have higher housing costs and higher rental costs, and that's one of the areas that's really helped keep our I don't want to give anybody a hard time in the audience that's coming up on the next panel, whatever that may be. But you can see medical care at 6.5% year over year. If you just sort of mosey down that column. Okay, thank you very much. So, I'm just kidding. Sort of. Okay. Closing, and again, just trying to pay attention to the time. Consumer confidence, confidence in general, we're very concerned with, and consumers seem to be still somewhat impacted by inflation, but it has bounced back somewhat significantly. Business confidence, not as much so. Big business, some services are doing okay, manufacturing not doing so well. Our Colorado index is negative. We just came out with it again last week. Businesses seem to have weaker confidence levels overall. So let's look at Colorado and how are we doing as a state, and then some of the key sort of sectors over the next few minutes. So looking at Colorado, this is our 1-year change or the current level, depending on the indicator. And you can see our rank out of 50 states. The District of Columbia is not included in this. And we used to be top 10 in many of these things. Now we've sort of gone back to sort of middle of the pack on many of these things. The employment growth in particular, the second line down, 37th. We believe strongly, and so does the State Department of Labor and Employment, that this is going to be revised significantly upward. So we really don't think we're the 37th lowest state in employment growth. But all of that said, you can sort of see we're more in the middle of the pack in terms of where we are. One sort of exciting number down the bottom there, labor force participation rate. I know it's just a bunch of letters on the graphic, but the third one up, we have the highest labor force participation rate in the country. So I can say this joke in Durango, when we legalized marijuana, everybody thought no one would work anymore. And we have the highest labor force participation rate in the country. So I don't know, is that funny? I think that's funny. I don't know. That's funny. All right, and then you might be happy to see, I'm sure a lot of people in this room and a lot of people all over the state are very concerned with the affordability issue. And you're going to hear some of that from Nate shortly. So when I look at this and our year-over-year appreciation has gone down. We're way towards the bottom. We were top 5, top 10 for years. And now you can see, and I'll show you in a moment, we are much lower in terms of our labor force. In terms of our housing price appreciation. We've also not seen the growth in population that we had, or the state demographer had anticipated. Our net migration to the state is still a fairly low number. They're still forecasting a bounce back going forward. So we'll see where that goes this year and next year. I do think the forecasted number, if you will, the estimated number for 2023 on this graphic is going to be revised down. So it's going to be a little bit smaller. And that is part of the reason that we have some of these labor force issues. I mentioned to you earlier, just very quickly, I mentioned to you earlier that we had the 1.4 jobs open for every unemployed person in the nation, the job openings ratio. In Colorado, that's 1.7 jobs open for every unemployed person. So we have a tighter labor force than the nation does as a whole. And part of that is, maybe getting more sort of population moving in, we'll see. So this is the state demographers' work. We take no credit for this, but they participate in the forecast and putting the booklet together with us. And you can see what the estimated changes are on gains or losses. And the highlight here, of course, is you're in slightly positive, this corner, except for Dolores and San Juan. But all of the ones in red are in the negative population forecast category for the year ahead. So out losers of population, if you will. And I should have said this up front as well, just really quickly. The presentation will be available in PDF format, so people want to see these slides. Maybe too much information, or hitting it more quickly than you would like. One of the interesting things that demographer is focused on right now, and I'll just say this sort of quickly, is just keep bearing in mind the share of total population of the youth population, 0 to 17, with babies through 17. And even though our overall population is going to be going up because the state's population is going to be going up through 2050, there's going to be a smaller percentage of that in the 0 to 17 category. So that, of course, has implications for the school districts and so on as we go along. So here's our estimated employment change for this year, what we're forecasting. And you can see we have 4 sectors that are losing employment: financial activities, information, manufacturing, and construction. We're a little bit different than the country as a whole in terms of the construction piece. I'll talk more about that in a moment. The largest job gains are in the top category, professional and business services, which is one of the highest paying job categories. But if you look at the last 3, look at the last 6 months of national data, 90+% of the jobs have been created in the second one down, government, the third one down, education and health services, and the 5th one down, leisure and hospitality. So when, I said earlier, we still have job growth and people are feeling good about still having job growth at the national level, all of that is true, but it has been very heavily concentrated in 3 sectors. And some people think that's a warning flag, if you will, that we're not having broad-based growth in the economy. We're having a much more narrow growth in the economy in terms of sectoral growth. And a lot of the jobs in health services, social assistance jobs are listed under health services, just as if you're not familiar with that. So all of that is rolled together. It's not just nursing and doctors and so on. It includes all of the social assistance categories as well. So our employment forecast for this year is 1.4, down from 2.2. The number you see there is really close to what I told you last January for 2023. I think we're going to come in really close to our forecast. It's actually a little bit higher than what we forecast, but overall it's been strong. And this is the largest ever employment we've had in the state of Colorado. You can see there on the right-hand side, we have the largest workforce we've ever had in the state of Colorado. So the state continues to be healthy in sort of the basic fundamentals. So if you want any of our stuff, this is not to get the booklet. You can scan this QR code at your convenience, and you can get to all of the information that we produce on a regular basis. And if you really would be my pal, you would sign up to contribute to our Business Confidence Index, which we do quarterly, and it wouldn't take you but 5 minutes to do it, and that would be great. We're always looking for new participants and people in different industries and businesses and so on. All right, so moving along and keeping this focused, first of all, talk about construction a little bit. You can see here a reflection of what I said about the FHFA numbers for the state. Well, here are the MSAs. We don't get this for smaller than MSA level from the FHFA, but you can see other than Grand Junction, we're in the bottom like 20% in terms of year over year home price appreciation. And actually, you know, through the third quarter, which is the most recent, and you can see that 3 of the MSAs year over year are negative in the state in terms of year over year home price changes. So we are seeing the higher interest rate environment creating a definite slowdown in housing. And you can see that in terms of our residential building permits, how much they came down in 2023 from 2022, and we're forecasting a similar situation for 2024. This is not exciting. It's understandable with higher mortgage rates, so I don't want to sound like I just fell off the some sort of, you know, wagon, bumpkin wagon. Like, what are you not looking at the financial markets? But that said, in a state that has a significant housing shortage, cutting down on the amount of housing we're producing doesn't get you help close that gap. And so that is an area of concern. Overall, our construction numbers were down fairly significantly for 2023, and we're forecasting a slight uptick for 2024, but residential has been on a pretty steady decline, 2021 to 2022 to 2023, and again, continues to be sort of somewhat of a sore point. When looking at this, before I go on and talk a little bit about agriculture, and I'm mystified why all of the titles changed colors here, but at any rate, this is agriculture. If you can't read it there, when we went through you know, the housing piece, what we've seen in you know, studying this, a lot of very reputable groups have done that, and they think the state is maybe 100,000 units short of housing at this particular point in time. And so when you see the permits dropping so dramatically and the new units coming online dropping, you know, significantly year over year, there's nothing that would suggest that we're going to be closing any of that gap in the near future. My only optimistic statement in this area is that we are looking at gap changes in terms of a lot of units that were permitted in 21 and 22 are coming online. We're coming online late 23 and are coming online in 24, massive amounts of multifamily. So when we go forward from here, we'll be hoping that helps keep, you know, rental pressures down, if you will, as we go forward. So commodity prices, this is just sort of a quick summary for the people who are ag focused. You know, record year for crops and livestock prices, but a lot of issues related to costs, maybe not much of a surprise. When you look at the cash receipts of livestock, you probably know most of this is livestock is 2/3 roughly of the state, a little bit more in terms of receipts and compared to crops, but still big numbers. When we look at overall revenue continues to rise, but due to some of the COVID-related subsidies that were going to agriculture and some other pieces that are out there in terms of the rising costs, we saw quite a bit of a dip in, or think we have, in 2023 when the final numbers are compiled for net farm income. And we're hoping for a bounce back with some of those costs contained in terms of the expenses, but still the number less than 2021 or 2022. Looking at natural resources and mining, just a quick comment. We also have a section on renewables in the book, a pretty big section on renewables in this section, but you can see quite a drop off in 2023 and in 2024 that relates to pricing more than output. Then this relates to looking at the dollars per barrel of West Texas and also the natural gas prices that you see on the right. And we have seen so far not much of a bounce back in terms of rig count. Rigs seem to be going elsewhere in the country and not really coming to Colorado, not just the Western Slope, but Colorado in general has not had much of a change in RICS in 2023 at this particular point in time. Financial activities, quick comment about interest rates, and Nate's going to say more when he's up here shortly. So just a very quick comment on this. We see interest rates as coming down slowly, especially the mortgage rates and the 10-year rate. We saw some of that at the end of the year, and we think that will continue on. I, for one, do not think we're going to see any Federal Reserve rate cuts in terms of the short-term federal funds rate until third quarter. What I mentioned to you earlier about the wage inflation, I think I'm hopeful they're not going to consider any more increases, but I think people are overestimating how soon they might do rate cuts at this point in time. That's one of the things we're, of course, watching very closely. Colorado bank deposits, this shows you the year-over-year change. And of course, some of that is that the money was able to be moved into other money market types of instruments. We just put this up because for years, the bank deposits are a rough proxy for loan generation. So we kind of use this to track what we think the loan generation might be amongst Colorado banks. Quickie on leisure and hospitality, and you can see again jobs have been rising. We're back to good levels. Mentioned to you, it's an area which continues to have strong job growth until actually the last month here. DIA continues to be a really strong airport. I actually think this happened when I was here, and paying attention to the time. I actually think this happened when I was here 2 years ago. I made some not maybe nice comment about DIA, and I got a call from the airport. we do work with them. So like, do you like working with us? Do you like our contract? And the only thing I said was finish the damn thing. I didn't say anything really bad. It just like drives me crazy. It used to be the best airport, and now I'm, but anyway, it's getting much better. Much better. And in February, it's going to get really good. We're going to open all of the high-speed processing of TSA. Okay, but you can see year to date, we're way above pre-COVID levels. It's top 5 airport in terms of traffic. Way more international flights going to be going out of there in the next year. United has added a lot of the Dreamliners to their fleet, and they're going to fly a number of them out of DIA regularly. So we're very optimistic about the long-term development of the airport. Then a quick couple of comments. Here we are year over year through October, which is the most recent data we can get, taxable sales by city, and you can see where Durango is. So that's pretty exciting. It's had a strong year in terms of retail sales. And I'm sure a lot of that was used on the snow plows that were up, kept me up all night last night. Just a joke. It's a joke. People get nervous. So with that, I am closing, and I am saying thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry I sped through some of that. And if it is indeed my pleasure to introduce Nate Peach, who's going to take you on a journey through the local economy. He's an associate professor, if you haven't met him before, at the Katz School of Business, and he's in his 3rd year, and so happy to have the best dean in the country.
Excuse me while I get started. I've had a nasty cold over the break, so I will take a few timeouts in my presentation. Okay, thank you, Rich. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo some of Rich's comments. I do have a slightly different take on some key things that he said, so that'll be an interesting, hopefully a point of contention that we can argue about during the Q&A. But I've decided to title my presentation Durango's Adventures in Wonderland 2023 in the year ahead. Growing up, I loved the book Alice in Wonderland. I love the characters. I love how memorable the world that Carol creates is. And for me, as I thought about this year, I think Rich's slide at the beginning did a great job of replicating one of my favorite scenes of the book, which is the Mad Tea Party. In the Mad Tea Party, Alice shows up with the Dormouse, the Mad Hatter, and the March Hare, and she gets increasingly frustrated, right? They're just spouting nonsense at each other. And she just gets mad and just gets more and more mad. She gets very frustrated. And to me, that's how the economic news this year is felt. For every piece of good news, there's one that's equally bad. It's probably even worse. And then in terms of what economists, what the talking heads are saying, there's no consensus. It seems like the consensus is there is no consensus. So welcome to Wonderland. With the time I have, what I'm going to try to do is introduce a few key macro variables. Rich did a great job teeing those up, but I want to translate them into how they impact our local economy. And then I'll say some things about our little corner of Colorado. I'm going to jump into it for the sake of time, but I echo the appreciation to Bank of Colorado, guest speakers, the Plata Economic Alliance. A lot of people have been very, very helpful in getting this event going. All right. So like I said, I'll say a few things about the macro economy, and then in terms of the local economy, I'm going to key in on mostly labor markets and housing. Those are the two things I want to focus on the most. Okay, so to set the stage for the things I want to talk about at the local level, I want to talk about inflation, and this is a slightly different way to think about inflation or to calculate inflation. So it's the CPI, it's the same data that Rich was looking at, but what I've done is created an index that begins in April of 2020 and then goes forward to today. So the way that you interpret it, 100 is the benchmark, that's the starting point. And if you fast forward to today, the last data on this slide is November of 2023. You can interpret that 120 as a 20% increase in the cost of living since April 2020. All right. So if your rent was $1,000 in April of 2020, now it's $1,200. If your grocery bill is $500 a month, now it's $600, and so on. With inflation, what's important to remember is inflation is a rate of change, right? So let me offer a mountain biking analogy. If this is the trail that we are on, inflation is the steepness or the challenging nature of the trail. And at times it's been very, very steep. The cost of living, that's where you're at on the trail, right? That's kind of the level, if you will. So we're familiar, we all know that things have gotten a lot more expensive since the pandemic. To put this into perspective, though, we need to think about wages, right? We need to think about the income that we're bringing in, not just what we're spending. So on the next slide, I do just that. This is the same exact slide. It's the same exact chart, except that blue line is the growth in average hourly earnings. There's different ways that we measure income. I just chose this. And what you'll notice very obviously is the blue line is consistently below the red line, right? So in terms of your finances, in general, your income growth has not kept up with inflation since the pandemic. You are losing ground. We are losing ground in terms of our personal finances. All right. And this is concerning. And some of Rich's data that I might jump over a little bit in mine, we have plenty reason to believe that inflation in Durango and Southwest Colorado is higher than this, right? So that red line is probably steeper and probably higher than this red line, which again represents national inflation. But there's good news. Same graph, but I'm going to rewind the tape further. I'm going to go back to 2010. So you'll notice in the graph, now the lines are flip-flopped, right? So yes, since the pandemic, we have lost ground, but over time, the mark of our economy is that income grows faster than inflation, right? So at the end of the day, with a long enough time horizon, you are gaining ground, right? You're able to buy more of the things that you need to buy. Grocery bill takes up less of your budget and so on. So hold on to 2010. That's where this index starts. I'm going to come back to it because I have some interesting data on local housing that begins at the same time. Excuse me. this is a slide on mortgage rates and interest rates. I just will echo, I agree with Rich. I think it won't be till maybe the end of the year that the Fed starts lowering rates. We'll see. There's a lot of optimism towards that, but I think inflation will be stubborn. We are in for sustained wage growth with low unemployment, so we'll see. Okay, so this is where I want to jump into our local economy. So this is sentiment data from the University of Michigan. Rich shared some similar data. And so this is a survey that's been going on for quite a while. This series here starts in the late 70s. It's the University of Michigan. It's a national survey. It's probably the most well-known survey on consumer sentiment. And this has been the puzzle that I have been wrestling with throughout the year. If you look at this, what's relevant is when you look at the sentiment data most recently, we are really bummed out, right? Our sentiment is as if we're in the financial crisis of 2007-8. That's how we feel, but we're not there, right? And this is a puzzle. It's much like the riddle in the Mad Tea Party. Why is it rated like a writing desk, right? Why is sentiment so low? Why do we feel like we're in a recession when we're not? And the answer to this puzzle is really important. This indicator has been a solid leading indicator of the macroeconomy, a solid leading indicator of where we think the economy is going. And for some reason, it doesn't seem to be doing that anymore. And to put it into perspective, this slide comes from, this is from the Wall Street Journal, it was published in November of last year. And what they've done on the vertical axis is that consumer sentiment data that I just looked at. On the horizontal axis is a very simple measure of economic misery. What they do is they add unemployment to inflation. When either of those are higher, we're worse off. So they're going to put those together. And what you'll notice in that lower left-hand corner, those orange dots are for 2023. And we are consistently in that low left-hand corner. Economic misery is quite low. Unemployment is historically low. Yes, inflation's high, but it's come down. But in terms of our sentiment, we're nowhere near normal, right? Nowhere near the historical record. So again, the answer to this puzzle is important because, again, as a leading indicator, we want to understand what's going on. Why are people so pessimistic? There's a few theories that have been thrown out. The first, anytime you have survey data, typically people are critical of the survey itself. It's an old survey. The questions don't work anymore. Methodologies have changed. People don't have home phones anymore. And so the data aren't reliable. Certainly very possible, but again, as a macro variable that's held up since the early 80s, I would be hesitant to just kind of throw this away, right? I think there's something else going on. The next theory, which I think is very important, is that 2020 and the events of 2020 are going to cast a very long shadow, right? A pandemic, the political issues that have been brought to the fore, these are not resolved yet. We have an election coming up. And we're still kind of experiencing the shadow of those events. And I think it's a very accurate explanation. I think it's an important explanation, but not the one that I want to talk about. Oops. So it turns out when you dive into the data, people are very pessimistic about the years ahead. They don't think their economic fortunes are going to get better. That slide that I showed earlier of wages outpacing inflation since 2010, excuse me, we've either forgotten about it, we don't think it's going to happen, we don't think tomorrow's going to be better than today. And it turns out this is survey data. This comes from the city of Durango. They did a survey mid-year. All of this is on their website, so you can pull the full report. There's just a few things that I'd like to cherry pick from it. And the reason I want to do this, I don't think our community and our region is immune to this kind of economic malaise. We're not optimistic. And two things I want to highlight. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, compared to similar communities, we don't think that Durango affords good employment opportunities. And as you might imagine, the cost of living is a big drag on our sentiment and what we feel about this area. All right, so what I want to do is dive into the cost of living. Okay, so this slide, this comes from the Fed in St. Louis, which often has acronym FRED. And what this is, it's an estimate through 2022, so it's a little outdated. Often kind of county level data is hard to get. If you can't see the scale, green is a higher number. So the darker the shaded green, a higher number. And what this is an estimate of households within the county that are considered burdened. So burdened households, it's a 5-year estimate that ends in 2022. And what they consider burdened is a household that has to pay 30% or more of their income towards housing. It includes renters, it also includes homeowners. What I want to suggest, I'm going to take an optimistic turn, is that Durango is no different. We're not exceptional. We're not exceptional in this regard. When you look at the map, this is clearly a state and national issue, right? Pretty much all of Colorado is dark green. Again, you'd rather have a lighter shade of green. We look at the coastal areas, Washington, Oregon, California, bright green, kind of central Arizona from north to south, coastal areas on the East Coast. So we are expensive, but we're not unique. And some of the challenges that Rich mentioned related to the supply of housing, these are not unique to Durango. It's a state level issue. It's a national issue as well. If you dive into some of the data behind this, La Plata County is in the 85th percentile. So what that means, if you haven't had stats for a while, is that there's only 15% of national counties that have a higher percentage of burdened households than us. That's not an enviable position, but when you look at those counties, they're similar to us. In terms of the state, Boulder, the percent is 36%. Mesa County, where Grand Junction is 31%. San Miguel, where Telluride is, is 34%. So by and large, these are places that people want to be, have very high amenities, and they're paying a lot to live there. So I did see this as representative of some of the demand side pressures that Rich mentioned to the area. The next two slides come from Michael French at the La Plata Economic Alliance, so I want to thank them for this. And what this slide is a measure of the supply of housing. And what we see, it's often useful to think about demand and supply side pressures. So the previous slide, we have high demand pressures. People want to live in Colorado. They want to live in the West. This is exacerbated by not building that much, right? So when you look at the supply, this is monthly listings going back to 1986. We're at a near 40-year low, 37 years, but a near 40-year low. And go back to your principles of macroeconomics. This is the recipe for very strong price appreciation. What's also concerning, the graph does seem to have a negative trend. Maybe it's fallen off a plateau and it'll jump back up. But the trend, when I look at it, just as an eyeball approximation, is clearly negative. So not in a direction that would alleviate some of the price pressures that we're seeing in terms of housing. And as Rich showed earlier, when we talk about the cost of living, housing obviously is a big piece of that discussion.
This is actually a Bob Allen slide.
Okay, Bob Allen. So it's getting recycled. Okay, next slide. So this is an echo to the slide. This echoes the slide earlier. This begins in 2010. Rather than looking at inflation and wage growth, now we're looking at the price of homes in La Plata County versus wage growth. And we're seeing those lines, as we would imagine, that home prices are increasing, and they're increasing more than our wages are. And so that's putting a significant strain. This is very much behind those burdened households that we looked at earlier. Okay, time to take a turn, look at these goofballs. Okay, so enough being dismal. These are a wonderful family you may have met last year. Good news, they love Durango. Yes, they pay a lot for housing. The bad news is they are among some of the worst dressed in the worst dressed town. They have drunk the Kool-Aid. So as I said, with inflation, we need to think about income, right? Income's a big piece of this story. And so with this story, last year I talked about a living wage. So MIT has some great data on living wages, where they take into the account the cost of all kinds of things: transportation, childcare, food, you name it. So for this family of four, as a representative family, last year in 2022, they considered the living wage to be $98,000. All right, quite significant. Fast forward to 2023, that number has increased to 106,500. So for this family, just over the last year to keep up, they need about a 9% raise. That is not trivial. A 9% raise is fantastic. It is significant. That's not what we have seen at the national level. Last year, as Rich said, wages went up about 4%. So again, this family is losing ground, and echoing the comment that local inflation is considerably higher than national. Okay. Oh, no. Well, this did not work. I'll have to set it up. That's the punchline. That's the punchline. That's not the joke. So what I want to end with is some optimism. When you look into that survey, what I found, so the City of Durango survey, what I found to be the most interesting thing, by and large, was this little line that said, man, the cost of living here sucks. It's so expensive. But guess what? I'm not moving. Right? So when you look at the survey, we score really well. Are you going to live here in 5 years? Yes, I'm going to live here in 5 years. Should other people live here? No. Other people should not live here. So I think there's a disconnect, and it's represented by this bumper sticker. I saw this in Walmart a few weeks ago. Colorado was full. I hear Kansas is nice. At this point, I should remind the audience that the views expressed by Dr. Peach are not those of Fort Lewis College. We gladly accept out-of-state tuition. And what I think is happening is going back to kind of the sentiment story that I started with. I think we recognize we do have real challenges, and maybe I haven't spent as much time as I should have on those. The cost of living challenges that we face are real. They are profound. For someone like myself, kind of mid-career professional, I'm able to navigate those waters, but it is challenging. But those that are just beginning their careers, this is where it really, really hurts. And when you look at the national data, it's the younger generation that is the most pessimistic about their future. And they've really been dealt a bad hand, so to speak. But I do take this as an optimistic slide. If we really thought that the challenges that Durango and this corner of our state face were insurmountable, we'd leave, right? I think we would vote with our feet and we'd go somewhere else. We know that we have to pay a lot for the beautiful views that we have. We know that we have to pay a lot to have our streets plowed so we can get to events like this safely. And we also know, I think, that the grass isn't necessarily that much greener on the other side. I'm going to jump over that. There's one more slide that didn't seem to be in here. Oh, here it is. Okay, I'll end with this. So Rich mentioned some of the issues that we're seeing with debt and the burden of debt and credit card delinquencies and things like this. This is a slightly different take on it. Again, another map from the St. Louis Fed. And this is the percent of the population with subprime credit. And this is through the third quarter of 2023. Similar to the previous map, a darker shade of green is what you don't want, right? You want a lighter shade of green. You want these numbers to be lower. And what you'll see is our little corner of the state is those are very light shades of green. I'll jump over the specific observations, but what I take this as a sign of resiliency, that we are able to weather this high burden of housing that we face. The data is good. When you look at the trends are not alarming either. And I will suggest that when you look at this map, in many ways, it's the mirror image of those burdened households, right? When we looked at the burdened households, the Southeast, the Midwest, those are the places with affordable housing. Flip-flop the map, those are areas, specifically the Southeast, that in terms of credit and subprime credit are pretty alarming. So what I want to do as I finish, I am optimistic on Durango's future. I think that we do face, I would say, both the blessings and the curses of having high amenities, of living in a wonderful place like we do. In terms of labor markets, I didn't say maybe as much as I should. I do think they'll remain tight for the year ahead. I think unemployment will remain low. I think this is good news for workers, but it's going to be very, very challenging for firms trying to find and retain local talent, especially with the high cost of housing that we have. So I'll end there so that we can begin our Q&A.
We have 20 minutes for Q&A, and I will run around with the mic. And, well, we'll just start. That was a stretch, kind of a question. Questions? Larry.
Thank you, folks. That was awesome, that presentation. The question then, I guess, regarding all of this uncertainty that's proposed, all of the uncertainty that we see going forward. Rich, you presented sort of a base case that's moderate growth, then there was a pessimistic case that appeared to indicate some kind of a recession occurring, and then maybe an optimistic. So the question, and we're all going to be sitting here over the next 12 months, what do you think are the most important things that we should be keeping an eye on that are going to determine which of those lines actually?
Well, just in terms of that slide, I think the pessimistic scenario is by far the least likely. Some of the things that falling off the cliff types of things that were built into that scenario just have seemingly have very low probabilities. And conversely, the optimistic scenario actually has some. The optimistic scenario has a soft landing built in. The baseline scenario has very slow growth and maybe even a slight dip for a quarter or two sort of built into that. So I guess to answer your question more directly, number one is, to me, is financial markets and how the financial markets work themselves out. There's nothing can be more chaotic than, for example, if the financial markets start to get, commercial real estate in particular starts to get really choppy, it's certainly going to filter through to stocks. And we've seen very strong stock market appreciation over the last several months. It could go the other direction. Some people are suggesting 2024 is going to be a tough year for the stock market. Yesterday aside, so that would be one thing I'd be watching, because I don't think if consumer psychology changes negatively along with some of the credit types of things that are out there in terms of the defaulting rates and the pay-as-you-go types of things, I could see the consumer stepping away from the table somewhat big time. And then beyond that, it's, all of these things that are going on in other parts of the world, are they going to affect supply chains and put more pressure on inflation, energy prices, for example? And if that happens, that means we're in for a much longer haul with the Fed tightening. And I don't know if this will make sense, but I'm sure it makes sense to the bankers, but I don't know if this makes sense to everybody in the room. As the inflation rate is coming down and the Fed is holding the rate at the same level, the real rate of interest is rising, right? Because it's adjusted for the inflation rate. So actually, as inflation rate comes down, monetary policy is getting more restrictive than it was before. Even with them not changing the rate, just holding the same rate makes it more restrictive in a lower inflation environment. So paying a lot of attention to that in terms of what's the real rate, how that might impact some of the consumption that we have out there. We're kind of optimistic on this. We think, consumers will feel pretty good in the second part of the year. We'll start to refinance things and so on, because we do think there'll be some loosening by the second half of the year. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the Fed's really going to set the tone for the year, and the markets really want them to lower interest rates. But their battle with inflation is not over, and they've been very transparent. They've not thrown curveballs. 2% is where they're going. It's not there yet. And with what Rich was mentioning about wage growth, you know, it could be summer Q3 when they start to lower interest rates, but maybe not. I think I would be paying attention to that. But I am optimistic. I think most of our biggest challenges are behind us going into the year. Geopolitical events concern me, and with a big election coming up, who knows what turn that will take.
The election's huge. If you look at the growth of the US economy compared to any of the major industrial economies, it's been extremely strong. We've really been sort of the shining star. There's lots of things you can read about this, but we've been the shining star, so that's part of what makes us feel pretty good about what's going on. But, you know, I didn't put my death slide up there, but I am absolutely scared to death of the federal debt at this point and the financing of the federal debt. And we're in an environment where the labor force is going to get tighter and tighter, demographic shifts going on, more people like my colleagues are going into retirement. And with that happening, it puts more and more of a burden on us, the transfer payment system, on Social Security, on Medicare. And so, to me, I would love to see a Senate and Congress that tried to do something about that, but it seems just less likely as time goes on, as they get more polarized, that this is going to happen. And that's just a frustrating thing. And I believe that's why people don't think the future is going to be as good as, you know. I mean, I always said I want to make sure the world is a better place for my kids. And now I still say the same thing, but I'm not sure I can do anything about it. And it's just, that's just really frustrating.
I have a question. Can you speak to the yield curve and the length of the inverted yield curve? Historically, that's been an indicator that we could look for. Didn't hear you talk about that. So could you talk about what the yield curve is? If there's some kind of delay with liquidity injected into the market prior to an inverted yield curve, has an impact, or your opinions on that?
You should be answering your own question. I like to do that to people. You know, I had this conversation with Raphael Bostek at the Atlanta Fed Financial Conference back in April. And I said, does this trouble you at all that we have this signal that historically, if you have an inverted yield curve that long, you never miss, there's always a recession and so on. He danced around it a little bit, but he basically said that with the federal debt and all these other factors at hand, he wasn't sure how reliable the yield curve was in terms of, because of the liquidity demands from funding the federal debt and what pressures that was putting on the financial markets. So I'm going to jump in that camp and say, I'm not sure how reliable it's going to be. We have never sort of seen that indicator before. And I do believe with financial firms, I joke about this a little bit. I had that slide at the end that said headwinds, tailwinds, which is the equivalent of what you see at the end of any good, reputable financial firm like GS initials. That, you know, at the end they have 2 pages of why everything we showed you could be wrong. That's my version of that. This is why everything I told you could be totally wrong. But that's sort of one of the pieces. I just think with the yield curve, you have that. It's one of those relationships that post-COVID may not be the same, and especially in heavy debt might not be the same anymore.
Turn on the microphone to some of my students in intermediate macro. We talked a lot about this last semester. Yeah, it's a scary indicator. I think for me, I mean, I echo Rich's comments. I think how robust labor markets have been, while it's not showing up in sentiment, is maybe buffering against the yield curve that is, you know, flashing bright red at the moment. And I think this is one of Rich's slides showed it nicely. This is a structural, it's a transformation in our economy that I think we're going to be dealing with in years to come. I think firms are going to have to adjust if there's just not as many people out there. So that maybe that means you're not open on weekends. Talent will be very, very scarce. So to the college students in the room, like, go get it, and firms will be banging down your door to hire you. But I think we're in for a very long adjustment. There was a slide I wanted to mention about healthcare workers. We know about shortages in healthcare. We know about the demographics moving in that direction. But it's not just doctors and nurses. It's things like aides, phlebotomists that are the people behind the people, if you will. And that's going to create some real supply side issues. Again, this is great if you're in this industry as a worker. But back to the yield curve, for me personally, I think it's the resiliency of the labor market and consumers that have been able to offset what the yield curve has been telling us.
Talk for a minute about the Amazon tax, please. How much of the city's sales tax that increases is coming from state's Amazon tax, which I think has existed for a couple of years?
Apologize that I don't know what Durango will apply to county do. In this regard, we work with several entities that have marketplace and taxing all of the e-commerce, not just the Amazon has been taxed, but it's much larger than Amazon. We could be getting electronic e-commerce from other places, and a lot of parts of the state have put in marketplace order rules, if you will, that tax any sort of e-commerce that comes into an area. I don't know what the other counties do, or Durango doing specific, or maybe the state as a whole. Well, the state did it on Amazon because they were focused very well, because we have a state retail sales tax. So they're trying to get as much of the e-commerce at the state level, but that doesn't guarantee that it's also happening at the local level.
Nice.
I know that sales tax is up, but I don't know what percent of that comes from online retailers. I'm sure somebody really does, but sales tax is definitely, as Rich's slide shows, sales tax is up on the year. It's certainly a mix of residents and tourism is up. I slide that I jumped over. The tourism numbers are great this year. And again, it's not that's great for that industry specific, but all the other industries that supports as well.
I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about I'm not gonna say it correctly, but when you have the red words on the slide and talked about working from home was a concern. And I was just curious about that. I get that that's an uncertainty. We're kind of transforming the economy. We more and more people, especially my generation, are very interested in working from home. And that it, straps downtown and commercial real estate. But could that also be an opportunity specifically for our area? We live in a beautiful place. We have relatively good Wi-Fi, we have better broadband. Could we attract workers that then consume goods for our particular part of the state? I'm just curious.
So the answer is absolutely. It's a concern because we don't understand it. It's not a concern because I kind of take this on very quickly. If we didn't allow remote work for a percentage of our staff, we literally would not have those people working for us, because that's how we lured them to work for us. And not whining that the state doesn't pay, real estate agency, and the wages are not competitive with the private sector in our area. So, but saying to them, you can form your hours 9 to 3, or you can, work from home 1 day a week or whatever, seems to make an enormous difference with a lot of people. So when you have that flexibility, because it's very difficult. Well, it could exacerbate that commercial real estate collapse. We already have major buildings around the country that are in foreclosure, big buildings. There's lots of, just people care about this, there's lots of venture capital and funds on Wall Street ready to move in to buy these buildings up at 50 cents on the dollar or 30 cents on the dollar. But that said, someone's losing all of that money that, the banking system or some other insurance or somebody is going to be taking losses on those. So that's a concern in terms of just the orderly transition for that space. And the only good news I have there is that that's a rolling problem. There's X amount each quarter that comes into that sort of red category of concern. And so that's true. Now, years ago, I'm opening a wound in Durango, but you had a financial services trading firm here that moved down here, and then there was an outage in the system, and they moved out of here because they didn't have good enough Wi-Fi. It's at least a decade ago, but I went through that one of these presentations back in time. So if you're going to do that, you absolutely have to have lockdown, high quality internet.
We have 2 questions from this.
So yeah, I just wanted to kind of step back to one of your early slides you had on there, talk about debt ratio. You kind of indicated that ratio has been going down, and that was kind of a positive economic indicator, but I wondered how much that factored in rent into that. I know that we're seeing a lot higher percentage of households that are renting now, so they don't carry a mortgage. So could that be what's kind of hiding that trend and allowing that debt ratio to fall, even though the actual, household expense burden is actually rising? Now, could that be an actual, indicator more towards a recession, or to kind of take it a step further, does that lack of equity, appreciation in those properties, how is that going to impact down the road?
I don't know if I have, I'll conjecture on this a little bit. If there were much higher percentage of people renting, I think what you said would be absolutely true. Household home ownership has not dropped in the country at all. So actually, I think it's up slightly. So I don't think that specifically would be contributing. The great level of refinancing down to 2% mortgages has had an enormous impact on that. You saw it come down. People got great refinancing, and a significant percentage of mortgages in the US are under 3%. So that has really helped a lot in that regard. Also helping in that regard was the deferral of student loan payments, no matter how you feel about them. People who've been here in the last couple of years know how I feel about them. That has helped that situation. And now as those have come back on board, we'll see if that changes much, but it doesn't look like it has impacted the data very much. The rental thing's a good question. So the rent I showed you year over year, and Colorado is one of the lowest appreciation states for housing, and I showed you all of the MSAs that several were negative, but our rental numbers prices are not going down. That's why our shelter thing has gone up so much. So the shortage of housing, going back to Nate's slide, the shortage of housing statewide is continuing to put upward pressure on rents, and that wouldn't be showing up, to go to your question, that wouldn't be showing up in that debt burden, if you will, but it is a monthly payment.
My question sort of piggybacks off of that question, which is, we sort of just glossed over the construction slides and didn't really deep dive into those, but here in Southwest Colorado, in Durango especially, we do have a housing shortage, and I know I have a unique perspective of, I had a life change, and I went from two incomes, professional incomes, to one, and I'm a renter now, and I can just tell you that it is really, really difficult in this town. I think that maybe housing is misrepresented, because when you look to see what's available, like a lot of them are not multifamily units, it's just a room. And you're like, wow, I mean, people are renting out their campers for $1,500 a month. And I mean, this is a real one, I just saw the other day. So, but anyway, regarding construction, we know that there hasn't been much going on in the way of multifamily dwellings and units in the last, I don't know, 14 or 15 years, I guess. But the developments that we have seen, for example, Rocket Point Apartments, Gage Apartments, they are luxury apartments. And so I guess my question is to anybody here locally, what are we doing about this problem of not only just housing, you know, in general, the rental market being highly competitive, but low inventory as well. And then, I know because a couple of years ago, I was in a situation where I needed some subsidized housing, and they told me that the wait list was about a year. It's been 3 years. I don't qualify for that anymore, but I did at the time. And so that just makes me really concerned about, you know, we all see that there is a growing homeless population as well nationwide. And so, yeah, I guess my question is, what are we doing about it here in our own community? Because I think about this gap, you know, wages and how many service jobs are in this county. And how are these people affording it? Even the ones who need subsidized housing, they can't even get it. So yeah, that's my question is what are we doing about that?
Honestly, can't answer that, but there are other people on the room that can answer. I can say the following. Multifamily, there's a lot of discussion about this, and I'm not taking sides with my response here. But multifamily for sale construction has been impacted by the construction defects legislation that was passed. You could very much argue that it was legitimate, not just legitimate, but it was needed legislation, but it has clearly impacted the level of for sale multifamily, which is historically been entry-level housing for a lot of people, at least in the metro area of Front Range. So there's been a lot of work being done in the legislature, and there's been a lot of work being done in city, in specific cities like city and county of Denver, to try to figure out ways around not circumventing it, but making sure that it doesn't turn into lawsuits against every developer who does for sale types of projects. So that has been a big issue. If I asked the developer your question on the Front Range, they would say the amount of impact fees that they have to pay to develop right now, you can't produce low-income housing with the amount of development fees. And so they say they're building a quadrant of $500,000 house, which they call entry level, because that's like, you have to put the infrastructure in, you have to put the water in, you have to buy the water rights, all of those kinds of things. So communities, and there are a lot of communities who are trying to address this issue. When they're serious about it, they're working through all of those steps, or ways the city and county can help with that, and not giving people a pass, but in trade for, you know, affordable housing, actually developing truly affordable.
Yeah, I would just echo that, I think a lot more needs to be done. I don't think enough is being done, and what's, I think, challenging is, I think we need to do more on the supply side. I don't think demand side responses, while they are laudable, they're not gonna fix the problem, because the problem is people are bringing too much money here. So public-private partnerships around the supply issue, subsidizing high-density housing, things like zoning. I think that's the angle, but it's not easy. There's all kinds of headwinds against affordable housing, between regulations, between the profit motive, between just the scarcity of construction and builders in this area. There are a lot of headwinds. It is a real challenge, but I think things that we can do to lean on that supply side to alleviate that constraint a little bit. Again, whether it's, you know, one more apartment complex that had been subsidized by the city, or some sort of partnership, things like that can encourage. I think it needs to be high density, and there needs to be some way to offset that profit motive to incentivize builders to come up with things that, again, are more in the realm of what would be a reasonable kind of monthly living expense.
your time for one last question here, and then we're gonna take a short break, but I want to remind you, we do have another Q&A session later in the program.
Hi, you guys spoke a lot about the resilient job market and the idea of rates being higher for longer. Do you see the rates being higher for longer as a potential pressure on the labor market, considering that a majority of corporate America has yet to refinance at current rates and are even taking on new debt for the purpose of deferring interest payments?
Question asked by Katz.
Then I Google it. They haven't refinanced, so this is a good question. They probably at least a 5-year cycle on that, and frankly, they're going out with equity financing right now, not publicly traded, or going out with equity, not debt at this particular point at these rates. So I guess I don't think it's a big constraint at this point, and I mean, just reading all the labor surveys, they're far more concerned about the shortage of labor than they are about, you know, not being able to afford labor. I think the big challenge, if you look forward, is the impact of AI, and is that going to be a positive or a negative on the workforce? Honestly, I can easily see how it could make the workforce more productive. But I can also see actually any profession I pick right now, people are going to start booing. But like my son's a lawyer, I just say, hey, you know, this machine's going to replace you shortly, you know, just so you know. So that's not true. You have to be able to think through things, but I see that maybe as a bigger threat than actually the finance and stuff.
Last word, yeah, I'm still optimistic. That burden will be higher, interest rates will be higher, so yeah, the refinancing, I don't, you're spot on with that, but I just go back to the resiliency of labor markets. Unemployment is really low. It would have to uptick quite significantly for us to be anywhere near what it would look like a recession in terms of labor markets. And what that low unemployment is doing is sustaining the consumer spending that Rich mentioned. And while, yeah, those corporations might be increasing their debt, the burden of that, the consumer is still keeping them afloat, and I think that will be okay, at least for the coming year.
Thank you.
We originally had a 10-minute break built in, but I think they caught up on some time. We will start with healthcare at 10:30 sharp. Sharp. Rich said sharp.
Yeah.
You'll get started in 1 minute.
Rich, great question.
We're now ready to get started and go take your seat, please. Get started and go take your seat.
So after this screen. Right. These guys over here.
I'll let them have it on the
We're gonna ask everyone to sit down, we're gonna move on to the healthcare portion of the outlook. I get the privilege to introduce our next presenter. Josh Ewing is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Colorado Hospital Association. He is well versed in healthcare, especially within Colorado, but also follows Colorado and its relation to national trends. In addition, I know Greg Bain is jealous of this. Josh probably has the best hair in Colorado.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you all for the opportunity to join you today. As was alluded to before, I came all the way from Denver to depress you. So let's dive right in. So I do represent the Colorado Hospital Association, and Colorado's 106 hospitals and health systems. But I think as you hear my comments today, and you think about the discussion before us, everything I'm saying is applicable to the healthcare continuum. All providers are experiencing the same challenges, and we've really had a bit of a reset in our healthcare system since the COVID-19 pandemic. And as was alluded to by Dr. Peach's presentation, the coattails of the pandemic, or the impacts, will continue to impact our healthcare system for many years to come. And so I think what I want you to keep in mind as I talk through some of the impacts to our healthcare system is that this is a bit of the new normal, and I'm not here to depress you necessarily, but I think it's important for us to keep in mind that what our healthcare system looks like today is probably going to look much different in a few years, because we have to respond, and we're in the midst of that transition. So let's start with some national trends really quick. The financial outlook and the structural challenges facing our healthcare system, and hospitals in particular, is not great. And we'll dive into that in a second. Increasing costs and decreasing payments being a big driving factor of that. Patients are struggling. All of us are consumers of healthcare, and healthcare is something that's deeply personal, which is why I try not to be depressing in these conversations. But it's important for all of us, because we're all going to need the healthcare system at some point to understand the realities facing our healthcare system. We're seeing a great deal of consolidation, particularly in the health insurance space, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, because of the challenges, the headwinds facing our healthcare system, there's growing calls for government to take action, or policymakers to take action. And particularly here in Colorado, we've seen that where our policymakers are trying to be responsive to what they're hearing from their constituents, but it's having detrimental impacts at times to our healthcare system, the accessibility, the affordability of our healthcare system. And so real quick, in healthcare, one of the huge factors that we're seeing is the shift to public payers. That's Medicare, Medicaid, and other public programs. This is significant because public payers typically pay below cost, meaning for every dollar in services provided, they pay at a rate below that. And so that difference, that delta has to be made up on the privately insured population, which, as we heard from the demographic portion of the presentation earlier, is shrinking. As folks get older, more folks move on to Medicare. That population that we can shift that cost to is shrinking over time, meaning that the costs are going up for us in the privately insured market. In the nation, nearly half of all Americans now are insured in public programs. In Colorado, we just crossed that threshold. Over now, 50% of Coloradans are, just over 50% of Coloradans are insured by public payers. We're also seeing increased cost to the privately insured through the form of high deductible health plans. For most of you in the room, you remember when you looked at the back of your insurance card and it was $25 to go to the ER, it was $50 to go to a specialist, and that was what you paid. Now we have deductibles that are $2,000, $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 annually. And that the rate of that increase is growing at a rapid rate. And now 50% of employees in America are in high deductible healthcare plans, meaning that the financial risk that used to be borne by our payers, our insurance companies, is now largely being borne by us as consumers. And that's having a significant impact on our pocketbooks and how we think about the healthcare system, because it's incredibly painful to seek out healthcare services. I mentioned consolidation. There are six primary insurance companies now that dominate the market. I would note that Elevance and the Blue Cross Blue Shield up at the top are largely the same, one and the same in many states. And then from there, health insurance companies are also now the largest employer of primary care physicians. They own the pharmacy benefit managers and the pharmacies. And so this is having a constraining impact on the healthcare system, particularly when you think about independent providers or smaller hospitals that don't have negotiating leverage in those conversations. They largely have to take whatever reimbursement they're offered at this point, which is having a significant impact on the accessibility and affordability of healthcare. And then finally, I mentioned the political wins. I don't know if you can see on the screen, but these are two kind of quotes. One from our governor, Jared Polis, and one from Nikki Haley, who's running for president on the Republican side of the ledger. What I would say is that the partisanship that around healthcare is largely coming full circle. And I think the frustration that many of us feel around our healthcare system is playing out in our political sphere. As with many things, as the politicization increases around the healthcare system, we end up with half measures and political policy measures, as opposed to those that are really rooted in addressing the root causes of the challenges we see in our healthcare system. So let's talk about Colorado in specifically. We released this morning, the Hospital Association, our 2023 Q3 report on the financials of Colorado hospitals. Over 70% of Colorado hospitals now run without a sustainable operating margin. Over 70% of hospitals, I'm gonna say it again, run without a sustainable operating margin. That is a significant factor. And it has leveled out a little bit, but 2022 was the worst year financially in recent memory, in my time in health policy of nearly 2 decades, for hospitals, showing the lasting impacts of the pandemic. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. First and foremost, our revenue is not keeping up with the increases. So we heard a lot during the previous presentations about the cost increases to individuals. That's impacting our healthcare system in a significant way. Costs are up about 30%, while revenue is only up about 20%. And it's just not keeping pace with what we need long-term to keep our doors open, to keep our staff happy and employed, to buy increasing supplies, keep up with medical technology advances. And so it's forcing some really tough conversations in our healthcare system about how do we adapt to the new normal. Labor being the single largest expense in healthcare, our labor expenses are up almost 30% since the start of the pandemic. And as you saw on the previous slides, even with that, our wages aren't keeping up with the rate of inflation. Housing is still up, childcare is still up, transportation costs are still up. And so we're really facing this tough decision where hospitals in Colorado, healthcare providers in Colorado want to do right by their employees. But if your reimbursements are going down and your costs are going up, it's really tough to do right by your employees and keep your doors open. Same applies to our supply costs. So this is pharmaceuticals, this is medical devices, this is the PPE that we talked a lot about. If you remember in the early days of the pandemic, our supply costs are up significantly. Now it is leveled out a little bit, but 8% year over year is still a really significant increase for supply costs. When they used to run in the 2 to 3% year over year, kind of on the high end. And then finally, charity care being free and reduced care, providing care for those without expectation of reimbursement from the patient is growing at an alarming rate. And it's compared to the Q3 of 2019, it's up 59% in Colorado, meaning that more and more Coloradans are needing help with their medical bills than ever before. This is having a significant impact on our hospital system, where that this adds to the costs. And again, we want to do right by our patients, but we have to strike that balance and find ways to deliver care in a way that maintains access to care in our communities long term. And then I mentioned the under reimbursement from public payers. So this chart before the line is a 10-year period where $17.8 billion in a shortfall from Medicare and Medicaid to Colorado hospitals. We were underpaid $17.8 billion over that 10-year period. We're looking at that between 2023 and 2026 to almost double. So the reimbursement for public payers is dramatically dropping while more and more people move in to those programs. Again, long term, this is going to have a significant impact on our healthcare system in Colorado and forcing some really tough decisions about how do we talk about reimbursement for our public programs. This isn't a conversation to bash or harp on public programs, but if we've made a commitment to Coloradans and Americans that these programs will be there to provide you quality, accessible healthcare, we have to talk about the other side of the coin, which is how do we make sure that those providers can continue taking those programs and maintain access to care in our communities. And then finally, we've talked a lot about workforce today. The challenges are felt in healthcare as well. Colorado is projected to have a shortage of 10,000 RNs by 2026. 54,000 ancillary positions. So as was pointed out, this is techs and environmental services workers and therapists. We have a huge problem as our population is growing. It's getting older. And we know that the older population needs greater healthcare services. We also face this lingering challenge or growing challenge. It didn't start with the pandemic, but it's certainly gotten worse. That we are seeing increased threats and violence against our healthcare workers in Colorado. In America, healthcare workers are 5 times more likely than any other profession to be assaulted on the job. Let me say that again. Healthcare workers are 5 times more likely than any other profession to be assaulted on the job. Every 30 minutes in America, a nurse is assaulted. And in a 1-month review, 90% of healthcare workers surveyed had either experienced or witnessed violence themselves. We have a huge problem that is contributing to our shortages are burnout. And if we, all of us who need the healthcare system, care about having that healthcare system, we have to think differently about how we protect our healthcare workers and how we are treating them ourselves when we go into healthcare settings. I think everyone has felt the shift over the last few years. We're angrier. We saw this in the confidence numbers from earlier. We feel less optimistic about our future, and it's playing out in our human interactions. It's hard to legislate or attack through policy human behavior. Hospitals and other healthcare providers have gone to great lengths to implement new measures, new security measures, new de-escalation training. Most of our badges that you see healthcare workers wearing often have a button on the backside that they can call for help quietly, and it's not enough. We're still seeing this dramatic increase, and it's not just coming from patients, it's coming from visitors and family members at an alarming rate. So I mentioned that this is playing out in our politics and the frustration that we all feel, the economic pressures that we all feel. Here at the state level, in the last 5 years, there have been 368 new laws impacting hospitals and health systems in Colorado. It's a massive amount of change, massive amount of change. Now, not all of these were bad policies. Some of them were ours. But over time, the additive effect, and we were having this conversation last night, healthcare is one of the only industries or policy areas where we never take things away. We continue adding. So raise your hand if you think the healthcare system is too complicated. Me too. It's because we never take things away. We never go back and say, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something different, or try it a different way. We double down and double down. And so now we have a healthcare system that has evolved over 80 plus years here in America in an additive fashion. And so our policymakers are charged with coming and making changes. We elect them to do work, right? But they come thinking that they can make they can pass a policy that can shift 80 years worth of evolution and additive policies in one legislative session. And what we get is more and more reporting requirements, more and more complicating factors. And so over the last number of years, we have been investing more and more in hiring FTEs to fill out Excel spreadsheets or input data than to go to the bedside. And again, this is not a partisan statement or an attack on our policymakers, but in this world of headwinds, as it was pointed out earlier, this is having a significant impact on the ability of our healthcare system to adapt and to evolve and to be responsive to our needs as a community that we're asking for from our healthcare providers. This is leading to, as I mentioned, regulatory overload. It's now one of the largest driving factors of concern among business leaders in Colorado is the regulatory overload that we're seeing because it's not unique to healthcare. The 368 new laws, the reams of new requirements. But it is having a significant impact on our healthcare system. So I want to talk briefly, I am the Vice President of Government Affairs. I want to talk, our legislative session is kicking off tomorrow. We have a 120-day legislative session here in Colorado. I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at for the 2024 legislative session. And then I want to try to end on a little bit of a positive note, a bright note, before I invite our panelists up. So here in Colorado, our top priority is going to be strengthening the healthcare workforce. And this takes kind of two shapes. First and foremost, we're looking at finding ways to protect our healthcare workers from the violence and threats they're experiencing. We have to do something. Without our healthcare workers, we don't have a healthcare system. Hard stop. And so we have to take measures if we truly believe that a healthcare system is important. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find too many people who would disagree with it. We're also looking at continued ways to grow the pipeline of healthcare workers. You have an excellent institution here in Fort Lewis. Across the state, we have excellent institutions, but we are not graduating enough folks to go into the healthcare field to meet the growing demand. And like other professions, like Rich's colleagues, we saw a lot of institutional memory leave during the pandemic. And so we have to right size and fill the 54,000 ancillary positions. We have to fill the 10,000 RN positions because our healthcare needs are only going to grow over time. We're also looking at trying to have some common sense conversations about how we can support patients in Colorado, lessening some of the administrative burden for providers and patients to make it just a little bit easier. We don't have any illusions that we can turn the Titanic that has been the healthcare system over the last 80 years, but we can start chipping away at some of the challenges. We know that you never get the details right the first time when you pass a new policy, a new program. We can go back and make tweaks to those programs to make them work just a little bit better for patients. And so we're looking at some pieces around that, including reforming prior authorization practices in the state of Colorado. That is the approval process between insurance carriers and providers. Because at the end of the day, we should all want our healthcare providers making our clinical decisions, not our insurance companies. And then finally, we always look to defend against policies that threaten access to care. I have dedicated my professional life to building a healthcare system that is more affordable, more accessible, and higher quality. But there are constant threats in the policy sphere, often well-intentioned, but threats that actually threaten to hamper our ability to access the healthcare system in a way that we want. So before I invite the panelists up, I want to just maybe end on a high note. You chuckle. It can happen. Let's try. In Colorado, at the height of the pandemic, and I was on almost daily calls with my colleagues around the country. We were all trying to figure out, how do we respond to this global pandemic that is overloading our hospitals, that is killing people. Colorado was a shining star nationally and continues to be to this day. To the level of collaboration, cooperation amongst our healthcare providers across our healthcare system. The all hands on deck approach that we demonstrated in here in Colorado became a model. It was written up in academic journals. It was, there were national news articles about the collaboration that we saw. The healthcare system responded in a way that I didn't think was possible. And I'll admit, I was a little jaded after, many years in this field. But hospitals, behavioral health providers, independent physicians and nurses, everyone stepped up to say, how can I help? They would hop on calls and say, you don't have bed space for that patient. Let's find a way to get them to my facility. You're having trouble accessing those medications. We have them in the southwest part of the state. We'll get them over to the southeast part of the state today. That level of collaboration and cooperation continues to this day. And the healthcare leaders who are about to come up here are, you should be very thankful that you have these folks and the teams they have built around them in your community, because they are modeling that behavior, not only for this region, not only for the state, but nationally. And we're so fortunate to use Jason's word from earlier, to have these folks leading the charge, because it is a really challenging time in healthcare. The headwinds are strong, but I am optimistic that based on the leadership that I've seen over the last few years, we're going to find a way, we're going to find a path forward, and it's going to be because of the folks that we have at the helm. So with that, I'd like to invite up Brandon Mancini, Megan Roberts, Joe Thine, and Shelley Burke to join us up on the stage. And they're going to share a little bit more about the local healthcare system.
All righty. Thank you all for. Okay. Thank you all for having us here today. you know, when, Dr. Peach was up earlier, he said with every good story, there's one negative story, so. After that, hopefully we can try to bring a few other good stories as we move forward. We're gonna do quick introductions, then I've got a quick little update on Mercy, each of the other presenters here do as well. And then, we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. I'm Brandon Mancini. I've been here for about 15 months in Durango. Proud to call Durango home. Married with two middle schoolers at Miller Middle School. Started my career over 20 years ago working as an EMT at a level 1 trauma center. Spent my entire career focusing on strategy, growth, developments, and hospital operations. And really, it's rooted in building relationships. So it starts with conversations like the ones we're having here today, certainly at the grassroots level and community. Jump right in. Mercy Hospital. So we began a legacy of care and healing back in 1882. Celebrated our 141st anniversary this past year. Through that time, we transformed into a regional trauma center, caring for the community at large. You know, state-of-the-art medical technology ranging from CT, MR, advanced robotic technology, all really being driven through Flight for Life, a regional helicopter service, which I'm sure you're all aware of. As both a fixed wing and a helicopter, so if somebody does need to leave our service area, we're fortunate to have a state-of-the-art team here to care for that. And we've really put a lot of emphasis into the healing environment. Wonderful food and nutrition team, and great artwork as well too throughout the campus. How do we measure up? So at Mercy, there's 3 different ways that you can look at quality metrics. We're a Leapfrog A hospital. When you look at CMS, we're a 5-star facility. US News and World Report ranks us as the top performing hospital in the southwest part of the state, ranking in high performing category of World War conditions. So collectively, we put all these together, it's in the top 5% of the country in terms of overall quality. When you look at us by the numbers, while the city of Durango has 28,000 people in it, at Mercy, we serve close to 200,000 people every year. And that's just looking at the overall inpatient admissions. We have about 1,100 total employees, 400 active medical staff. And when you look at the trends across the board, we're growing. Admits are up 4%, ER inpatient visits, and so this is the higher acuity patients, 13%. Outpatient visits are relatively flat. Some of that's with more patients choosing to go to urgent care. And also going to their primary care office. Surgery is up 8.4%. But the challenge is all those red arrows that you see there. That's what Josh spoke to. Salaries are up 6%. Contract labor up 31%. The big focus for us is physician remuneration. So this is lowest physician coming in to support our facility, 25% year over year. Supplies up 8%, and within that, pharmaceutical expenses up 30%. We're fortunate that our nursing vacancy rate, despite all of this, is at 0.33%. So the national average is about 28%. A lot of facilities are at 14%. We put a ton of energy at Mercy into creating recognition, and so we're at 0.33% right now. And a lot of focus on physician recruitment as well. So this is where we were fiscal year 21 to 2022. With several of the positions that we had leave our service area, we were down in almost every major service line. We'll fast forward right now to this past fiscal year, we're up in every service line with the exception of spine and neuro. OB, NICU, cardiac care have all increased. And this story here is collectively for all of us. So overall outmigration, how many people are leaving our service area and going to the front range for care? We retained 75.9% of the total patients in our collective service area here. When you go back 2 years, back to fiscal year 21, fast forward to fiscal year 2022, it dropped a little bit down to 74.2%. And fast forward right now, that 74.2% is growing back to 76.4%. So more people are staying in the Southwest community here for care than they were 2 years ago.
And a lot of that is attributed to the work we've done with recruitment. And so urology, you have the urologist that joins, you hand specialists, nephrologist, pulmonology, critical care, infectious disease. At Mercy, we were down to 1.5 total providers for our cardiac service line. We're up to 8 right now, and we'll have 10 over the course of the next 6 months. For GI, Dr. Taj here, a number of you know, a great GI physician. He left, went up to the front range. He was there for 90 days and came back. So I love Durango too much, and thrilled that we welcome him back. The new ambulatory surgery center and medical office building coming in, we're going to double the number of GI procedure groups we have available for our community. And a ton of work with primary care. We're fully staffed in primary care. We're focusing on expanding and looking at new locations. So the average time in terms of when you can get in to see a physician, you go back to 2021. This is for primary care patients that were doing 2 to 3 weeks. Well, we're down now to less than 48 hours. You can get in and see a primary care physician right away. So we've done this through employee engagement. And it certainly has not been easy, but our scores are the highest they've been over the course of the past 15 years, ever with an engagement score of 78. And we've done it through a lot of focus and recognition across the board. So Physician Lifetime Achievement Awards, we do a weekly Thursday celebration, a number of things on the campus. And we continue to find ways to reinvest in the community. So we awarded $500,000 for local nonprofits earlier this past year. We have our food security program where we really continue to focus on meeting this challenge for our community at large. Distributed 17,500 pounds of food, purchased $60,000 of food from local farms to reinvest in people in need, and work with a number of the local farmers for this program here. And with that as well too, we have our Fresh to Flourish program. Primary care patients through our programs that I just spoke with here have the ability to apply for vouchers where we provide fresh fruit and vegetables to all families in need. Lastly, behavioral health is a major concern, as you all know, for our community. When I first arrived at university about 1.5 years ago, so what's our behavioral health strategy? Personally, I spent a lot of time helping build behavioral health programs, and they said, well, we need to reach out to Access. And I said, well, this isn't an Access, it's collectively something we all need to work through together. So Shelley and I spent a lot of time together. I spent a lot of time doing EMS ride-alongs in the community, joining the Southwest Soviet Response District, helping complete the feasibility analysis. We're moving forward as continuing with the forced movement facilities and high intensity recovery residential program. So it's a major issue. Certainly, as Josh mentioned, with people coming in and just not being happy for the care that they're receiving. And so it's a challenge for all of us, and we'll continue to work through.
Let's see if we can transition well. Well, it's good to see many familiar faces in a different role, but still serving healthcare in Southwest Colorado. So excited to talk about Southwest Health System, both some of our challenges and the opportunities, but also the importance from an economic impact side. So a little bit about me. I've been in healthcare most of my career in Southwest Colorado for the last 20, serving both in physician practice leadership roles, public health, and now in the hospital space. A little bit about Southwest Health System, and also to highlight some of the work that our hospital association has been doing. At the end of last year, beginning of this year, they've launched a publicly accessible website, really to help our elected officials know about healthcare in their legislative districts. But it drills all the way down to a single hospital level or to a county level. So this is data coming right off of that public site, talking a little bit about Southwest Health System. It just highlights a few statistics in terms of emergency room use, deliveries, other statistics. I think interesting to note for our hospital and the size of the community we serve, we have about half of the emergency room visits that Mercy does on an annual basis. And yet we're serving a county that's much smaller than Mercy. And some of the emergency room traffic to Mercy is higher level of care that's coming from Southwest, Pagosa, others. And so our hospital really serves as an important outpost for healthcare delivery in the whole region. You know, I'd hate to imagine if all of our emergency room visits had to come directly to Mercy or to Animas, what that would do to the physical space needs, demands, other things. And so our ability to deliver care, not just on an emergent basis, but for a lot of things, really helps make care accessible to the whole region. Josh touched on, you know, public funding for healthcare. You can see a payer mix graph there. Most of our payments in Southwest Health System are coming from some type of federally funded program, Medicare, Medicaid, much more so than in La Plata County. And so when we talk about the demands for services and the available resources to meet those demands, they're very different just 45 miles over to the west than they are here in La Plata. And with that, we're also the second largest employer in Montezuma County. And so not only are we really important in delivering healthcare, but we're really important in terms of adding jobs and adding economic value to Southwest Colorado. Want to talk just a little bit about high-level challenges that we face, and then also how that translates into opportunities for us becoming successful in the future. So for those of you that heard me speak throughout COVID, I often framed up the challenge of delivering healthcare into three important resources. We need a physical building, we need supplies and equipment, and we need people, and not one of those things replaces the other. You can't replace a building with a person or a person with a building. And so as we look at healthcare, we have to find ways to fund all of those things. As Josh was sharing, you know, at a macro level, costs are going up more than revenues are coming in, and we post our audited financials on our website. So this is looking directly from our audited financials from 21 to 22. What you'll see is, despite having an increase in revenue, the expenses exceeded that increase in revenue by almost twofold. And of that increase, most of it went back into the labor force, either through salaries, wages, benefits, or other contract labor costs. And when we think about the cost of delivering care, we're also all employers. And so we see that increased cost being borne to us as an employer in order to provide benefits to our own employees. So we're seeing the healthcare delivery conundrum on both sides, is delivering care as well as ensuring it's available for our employees. From an opportunity side, just want to highlight some of the importance again that we play. So on the right-hand side, we measure how many people, unique individuals, come into our healthcare setting. And we can see both on an outpatient clinic side as well as for hospital services. And over 50% of the people that reside in Montezuma County in the last year have come into our walls for both a hospital-based service and a non-hospital-based service. So we're meeting the needs of over half the people in any given year. And then in addition to that, as Brandon was sharing, you know, the importance of recruiting trained healthcare professionals to the region. It's been a large focus of ours over the last 6 months. And this just shows you a funnel of our activities. So since the 1st of August, this is even updated as of yesterday, but roughly 40-some individuals have taken an interest in working in Montezuma County and Southwest Health System. 20-some of those are still in some form of active discussion. We've now got 15 interviews scheduled. There's 13 of which have been completed. We've had 9 offers go out, 8 of which have been accepted. So really have accelerated our recruiting activity to bring healthcare professionals to the region. And with that, I'll turn things over to Linda.
Hello, I'm Megan Roberts. I'm the newly appointed CEO of Animas Hospital, but I've been at the hospital for almost 20 years. So this is my baby, and I, continue to see it grow and flourish just like I do with Durango, and share the optimism of a lot of the panelists that, yeah, we're in a rough spot, but we can weather this. So I'm originally from Fort Collins, was fortunate enough to get my MBA while serving at Animas Hospital, and have been in a variety of roles since the beginning. And like Brandon, actually started as an EMT. So Animas Surgical Hospital was the first physician-owned hospital opened in the state of Colorado. So when we talk about the high quality and high class care that we're able to offer, for a town of this size to have a lot of firsts, to have a lot of things that we take for granted. I think about Fort Lewis College. I'm an alum of Fort Lewis College. And a lot of people ask me why, like their dropout rate is horrible. Well, so, you know, you come to Durango to play and students forget that and they forget to go to school. And that's part of what we see in our labor force as well. Fort Lewis has amazing professors that choose to live here and face the same challenges that we do with lower wages and higher costs. But they're world renowned. And so we see that in healthcare as well. And so we feel like we are a part of that story. We've been able to support over 90 local independent providers that have their own economic impact into the community. And every day I have one of those providers in my office saying, I can't do this anymore. The burden is too much. I can't staff my office. I can't provide care because I can't find staff to keep me efficient. And so these are the challenges that we are facing, and why it's so important for us to collaborate and to work as a community. And as Josh said, to continue to work across the healthcare spectrum for all of us. 100% of our partnering physicians are local and independent. And that says a lot. And so we are able to provide those physicians a little bit more control over how they deliver care. So Animas Surgical Hospital opened its doors in 2004. That wasn't the first of the hospital. It was actually a surgery center in a completely different business and a completely different location prior to that. But our physicians, in opening the surgery center, pretty much from day one said, I want to be able to do more. The surgery center doesn't give me my full breadth. I want more. And so they quickly looked at this thing that was a physician-owned hospital and nobody knew what that meant or what it was. But full steam ahead, here we go, and faced a lot of uphill regulations. So the regulations we've seen over the last 5 years are nothing new to physician-owned hospitals. We've been fighting regulations for a number of years, and again, nothing has been peeled back. We employ over 200 employees, and unfortunately our vacancy rate is a lot higher than some of our competitors and collaborators. We've got 39 vacancies right now across the nursing and support staff spectrum. In 2023, we saw over 25,000 visits to our facility. That's 12 beds, four ER suites, 5 ORs. That's 1 in 4 of La Plata County residents that sought services in one of our facilities. We ranked 5 stars in patient satisfaction. We're often not ranked in any other service line because we don't do enough in any one of those other places in order to have a true ranking. But we've been able to expand our campuses and be able to keep some of those services local. So as we've talked about the main hospital campus, several years ago, we expanded and opened again the surgical center in Escalante to be able to offer additional high quality, low cost care in an outpatient environment. Animas urgent care, which is bridging that gap between primary care, which has notoriously been hard to get into, and the emergency department, where we're very fortunate to have so many local emergency departments, but we also see them being used in ways that aren't appropriate and deliver part of that high cost of care. And most recently, we acquired Southwest Endoscopy Center. So that's Durango's freestanding endoscopy center. It was physician-owned for a number of years, but like a lot of the other stories you've heard, physicians abruptly retired at COVID, and that facility was at risk of closing, which means that those endoscopy services that Brandon talked about earlier that are constantly leaving, we were at risk of losing even more of those services. And so we're super happy to partner with Dr. Saslow and are heavily recruiting to find him some more support to be able to utilize that center to its fullest. We're a proud local business, and you know we are a local business with a corporate partner. So like I said, we have more than 200 local employees. When you talk about where those employees are coming from, it's not just Durango. We see a lot of folks travel from Pagosa, from Cortez, from Shiprock, from Farmington, to work in Durango because the work environment here is amazing. And so that presents its own set of challenges, but it is wonderful to see, you know, how we're able to pull in the 4 corners of Our economic contribution to the state of Colorado is estimated to be 122 billion. And we're proud to say that the economic impact per patient is higher than anyone else in this Four Corners region with regards to healthcare. So we generated over $31 million of labor income. So that's between our labor that we pay, what they go and spend, what we spend on healthcare, what we pay for ancillary services. That was the economic trickle-down impact. And then over $150,000 has been donated to community organizations, and 11.25 million in uncompensated care over the last year, which is pretty significant for a small local hospital. So I heard that the good slide ends with headwinds and opportunities. So I'm playing into that. As everybody said, we've seen this evolving payer mix. Our income continues to decrease while our costs continue to increase. A lot of that is, we're seeing more governmental payers, those Medicare, the Medicaid programs that are extremely important, but also reimburse typically less than our costs. The growth cost of supply costs, and not just supply costs, because we are so lucky to live in this remote community, the cost to get supplies here is pretty exorbitant, and it continues to go up as we see energy costs increase, as we see labor costs increase. So that's one of those crazy factors that we have no control over. Staffing challenges, we've all talked about, the availability of resources. There's a statistic out there that says for every physician that is graduating from medical school, 5 are retiring. We're seeing that same thing in nursing. The other thing we're seeing in nursing is that a lot of the nurses coming out of nursing school right now went into nursing school because their friends were talking about how great the money was. Well, all of those folks were traveling. And the quality of care that a traveler is able to provide is nothing compared to what the true homegrown staff is able to provide. Not because they're not great nurses or providers, but they're not invested in the facility. They don't know their nursing comrades. I just had one of our employees who was at a NICU in Austin, and you can imagine that's a pretty high stress environment. Not one nurse in that environment was employed by that facility. And they're taking care of really sick babies all day long. And it adds to that fear that we see patients have, which leads to some of the violence. And it's not just the physical violence. We're seeing a lot of emotional violence against our teams. But when you have a nurse walk in and say, "Who are you again? How long have you been here?" It doesn't add to the confidence of the patient, which leads to some of those outbursts that we've been talking about. The increased regulatory burden, and then the reimbursement challenges from health insurances. So this is not the reduced payments, but it's how much we have to fight the Blue Cross, the United, the Cigna to get paid what our contract says we're due. In no other industry can you go in, expect services, and if somebody says, "Sorry, we're not going to pay you," you get to retain those services, not have a lien placed against you, not get those taken back, and get to walk away. And we're seeing that we're fighting the insurance companies every day, which is also adding to the increased cost. Even with all of that, Durango continues to be a place that people want to live. And so we continue to invest in physician recruitment, staff retention, growing service lines. I'm constantly amazed at what we can offer Durango from a healthcare perspective that you don't have to travel. It's amazing that those numbers are as high as they are, and this panel is working really hard to keep even more people here. But if you go to any other rural community in the state of Colorado, they will not have the breadth or depth of services that we are able to provide. And then continuing to support the healthcare workforce in development. We're working with Durango 9R to start, to intro people into healthcare, to make them excited. We need support staff. It's not just the nurses and providers, it's the front desk staff. It's the phlebotomist, it's the EMT provider, it's the dietitian or the dietary services. And when those are the lowest paying jobs, and those are the folks that are traveling the farthest to get to us, and most often in the line of fire, it's really hard to recruit into those environments when, and no offense to the food industry, you can go cook and not listen to complaints and make the same amount of money. And so, you know, as we continue to face these challenges, we're excited to do it with you guys and with this panel.
So, can you hear me? Getting to go last means I have to go fast, right? That's the deal. So I'm Shelley Berg. I have been with Access Health System since 2000. I think sometimes I look back and think, where have 23 years gone? But healthcare is such a dynamic, ever-changing field to be part of. And so I started my career when we were actually Southwest Colorado Mental Health Center. So for those of you who've been around for a while, you might remember that name. But now we are much more than just a mental health center, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I always start presentations with our mission statement because I think as a nonprofit healthcare provider, that's the anchor that we have every single day. What is the work that we're doing? Who does it impact and why are we doing it? Why do we fight so hard for some of what we all care about? And really, we have a really long mission statement that our board approved, and I love it. And I would say to you, I distill it down every single day to make a meaningful difference. Did we make a meaningful difference in our community? So as a community provider, part of what I see our goal is to figure out the partnerships, the collaborations, and the kind of service gaps that we can fill within our core competencies, and then partner with our key hospital partners, partner with law enforcement, partner with county commissioners, partner with our public health departments. There are a lot of resources, but we have to work together differently because the complexity of the system is what is weighing everything down for everybody on this end. So I'm going to start with a quick story. For those of you who have been around in this community for a long time, Southwest Colorado Mental Health Center started. It was grant funded. A group of people, well-intended citizens, came together and wrote a grant for $28,000. They wanted to provide mental health care in this region. So they hired 3 part-time staff, one of whom was an administrative assistant, 2 clinical folks. None of them worked full-time. They put an ad in the paper and they said, we're ready to provide mental health services in this region. Please call us or apply, fill out this application. They had 20 applicants apply at that time. The team could only take 6 folks. So we started providing mental health services for 6 folks in April of 1960. So we've been around for a while. Who we are today, we're an 11 region service area. We serve 11 counties. We're a $46 million organization. And we have a very deep, broad continuum of care that crosses from short-term crisis residential services, psychiatry, vocational, behavioral health counseling, primary care or oral health, pharmacy. And if you remember nothing today, remember we are more than mental health. That is my constant advocate. Wanda knows this. So about us, how did we get here? So we are both a community mental health center designated by the state of Colorado. We are also a licensed substance use provider. And we are also most recently a federally qualified health center. That happened in 2014. What makes that really special is that those 3 platforms, while very different, very complicated, very administratively burdensome, and they're licensed differently, they're paid differently. Frankly, it's job security for me. 23 years, I'm still making it work. But it's how we make the magic happen in the care that we do. We are not just one thing for our patients. We are a multitude of things, and that is how we want to be. We want to be the right door for when you show up to cover all of your primary health needs, if that's what works for you or the right provider for you. So since 1960, we've been a mental health center. Since 1972, we've been a licensed substance use provider. And since 2014, we have been a federally qualified health center. And we are, until this year, we were the only organization in the state of Colorado that were all 3 of those things, because it's not easy, but it is incredibly important to do that. Now, recently there was a merger that happened in the southeast corner of the state. So there's a mental health center and an FQHC that have merged. So there are now 2. So Colorado's leading the way. This is a quick stat sheet about us. So you can see our payer mix. It's kind of interesting to go last. Everything everybody has said should sort of feel very familiar to you at this point. Our payer mix for Medicaid is 47%. Our Medicare is about yeah, almost 12%. Most people are surprised to know that we have about a 30%, close to a 30% insurance rate, commercial insurance. So we have a mission to serve the community, not just the uninsured. And then of course, 12% self-pay and uninsured, which is, frankly, I know my peers will support me when I say this, we have a higher than average uninsured rate in this part of the state. We always have, and it creates incredible demands on the healthcare system. So if there's something we can solve for in the future with maybe Josh's help, I am 100% willing to part. I think here, this was my take on some of the big picture stuff, and it's gonna look awfully familiar. It's looked different in every slide, but this is what we're all talking about and all the kind of things that we think about that keep us up at night. There's too much regulatory complexity in healthcare. Insurance coverage is hard. It's hard when you're the patient, and it's certainly hard when you're the provider or the administrator. We need payment reform in this country for healthcare. The way we pay for it doesn't match what we need out of it. And inflationary pressures, you've heard a lot about that today. I think the other thing that I would say in this region that people don't often know as much about, we are a governor designated medically underserved region. And we are also a healthcare professional shortage area in behavioral health, medical, and oral health. So the pain you feel in this community trying to access services is real, but it's been a long-standing problem, and we are always trying to find ways to work on that. I always put a plug in my presentations. If you haven't read the Surgeon General's report recently, he did a really nice white paper about the impact of loneliness and social isolation and the anxiety, depression, and increased substance use that we're seeing across the country. So if you are not connected to somebody in your community, make a new friend today, because it's about those connections is how we help support people so that the healthcare system doesn't have to be what I call the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And then if you talk about individuals, we're seeing a lot more who've gone from comorbidity to multi-morbidity. Patients are sicker, they have more complicated situations. We need to be culturally responsive in our care, and that's a changing target. And workforce challenges we've talked about. We've got recruiting, we've got retention, we have pipeline challenges, but we also have longevity challenges. This is a hard field to work in. People don't come and stay in healthcare for 30 years anymore. So we have a lot of turnover out of the field, and that's a challenge for us to deal with. Trends, social determinants of health. I joke, if you've ever been involved with community mental health centers were doing social determinants before they were cool. But they're cool now, right? It's part of healthcare delivery. We need to tend to what people's pain points are. You can't care about your diabetes if you don't know how you're going to pay your electric bill, right? Those are important things. We also are working on team-based care. As we know, we have professional level shortages in this country. We need to find ways to identify and design care delivery in different ways that meets the patient needs, but relies less on those higher license level credential providers if they're going to be hard to find. And I think telehealth advancements, everybody jumped into telehealth during COVID, but we live in a part of the world where we still have places you don't have cell phone signal. We sometimes have our internet goes down, so we need a little more stability there, but I think there will be advancements in telehealth that will make a difference in more communities. And then I think a couple of you talked about AI. If AI is not keeping me up at night, worrying me about what in the world it might do, I have a lot of optimism about what I think it can do in the healthcare setting in terms of improved diagnostic, faster target to treatment kind of modalities, and really making a difference in what our providers' experience of care is. So with that, having kind of hopefully swept the conversation up, I will turn it back to our moderators.
We have plenty of time for questions. Pat Borders is gonna take that side of the room again. I'll go on this side of the room again. And oh, let me say one thing. None of you signed a HIPAA form on your way into work, correct? So please, aside from keeping our questions short so our full panel can weigh in, we'll all be around afterwards. You can have personal stories or recollections you'd like to share. That would be the more appropriate time to do it if you want to get to as many questions as possible. And also, with our healthcare professionals, it probably would make them a little more comfortable as well to not be diagnosing your aching knees like mine this morning. Cool. So, questions. Oh boy. Okay.
Hey, thank you everyone for being on this panel. A quick thing that came to my mind is, you guys are all talking about the challenges that you guys face in a state where we are routinely kind of designated the fittest state in the nation. So if we're being challenged by all of this, how are states like, and I'm just gonna, sorry if anyone's from the states, but like the Deep South, where we know there are rates of comorbidity and multimorbidity and diabetes and obesity and all of that are so much higher, and often their needs levels are also that much higher. So they've got to be working on Medicaid, Medicare levels that are way higher. So like, what is national kind of picture on healthcare given all of that? And what's being done in healthcare and down the line to more of a carrot than a stick, as far as like, how do we motivate people to do things for their own health, so that they care more about their own health? And what is that like? I guess in workforce as well, like what can we be doing in the workforce in the, you know, as employers to encourage our employees to take the time to exercise and eat well and do those things?
It was, but they're all spot on. So I think we all know Colorado, we've heard the stat, we're the fittest, we're the thinnest state. We're also our obesity rate is climbing at a greater rate than any other state in the nation. We're catching up. Our overall health is declining as a state. Yes, we tend to get outside more, our activities, our hiking, biking, snowboarding, skiing, whatever, but our health status is catching up with the rest of the country. I would say you asked about what are other states doing or how are we talking about this nationally? I think we're all grappling with the same challenges at this point. We have a rapidly aging population and our health status is getting worse. It's one of those headwinds that I think you heard from a lot of folks that we're facing. What I would say to the latter part of your question, I would ask my panelists to maybe speak more directly to this locally, but I think the shift that we're hoping to see that we haven't been successful is the partnership around health. Shelley mentioned payment reform, paying for outcomes as opposed to individual services. But at the end of the day, it has to be a partnership. We as patients have a responsibility in our health. We need more team-based care, and I think Colorado is leading the way in that in many ways, but we're far from getting there. And the challenge I might identify before I hand it off is we have conflicting policy and payment mechanisms in place right now. So we all know we want to pay for better health outcomes, but our policies that are being passed by regulators or the state legislators or even the federal government are often flying in the face of the changes we actually need to see in the healthcare system to do that. And so it's a constant battle that we're facing because we have this balance of trying to secure short-term political wins while trying to, as I shared earlier, turn it to the camera. And that's kind of incumbent upon us. And as business leaders, as employers, I would challenge you to really talk with your policymakers to move away from short-term political wins and look at long-term solutions.
I just want to add to that real quick. So it's a big focus for us here, and when we think of the region that we serve at large, those 200,000 people that we treat at Mercy every single year. The overall socioeconomic classes ranges widely. So we certainly see Silicon Valley execs, people that move back here and live here part-time. 30 to 40% of the patients that we treat at Mercy are New Mexico residents, and we continue to see that grow every single year. And so there's more and more of an influx from the Farmington area and even further south that comes up every single day. And so while we continue to focus on all social determinants of health, the one that keeps me up at night the most is behavioral health. And this is the one that in the Bodie Miller presentation, I don't know how many of you saw the paradox. If you would show your hands here. So for those of you that didn't see it, people said, well, how can you have these awesome ski towns that people flock to and have some of the fittest people around the country and people are unhappy? And there's multiple factors that weigh into it. One they said is that with the peaks that you have in ski communities, sun sets earlier at night, the challenges that you have with the workforce, housing, and across the board. And then, when you're out living a fun life lifestyle and opportunities to addiction and other challenges as well. So all these things compound upon themselves, and so you could be the fittest, healthiest, community in the world, but if we don't, have a solution in place to continue to fix the, rising behavioral health and substance use concerns, that's going to be our biggest,
Mary, thanks for the question. I'll answer it in two ways. One is, Colorado is really close to looking like some of the other states where there's a increased demand for services and reimbursement challenges. So we're fortunate as a state not to have a hospital closed in decades. Yeah, almost 40 years. Just in the last 24 months, we've been at risk of 2 hospitals closing, one up in Leadville, one in Delta, literally within days of not making payroll. So our state is on the precipice of not looking like other states that are struggling with this in ways that we are, but it just hasn't been really surfaced yet. So we're not out of the woods in the state. The idea of keeping people healthy is really important, and I think societally we're gonna have to reconcile that, because when I'm healthy and call 911, I still want an ambulance to come, and I still want an emergency room to be there. So Southwest Health System runs the EMS service for most of the county. And again, we have 12,000 ER visits. If we have a really healthy population and most of our revenue comes from people using our services and people use less of our services, we put at risk, given the current funding structure, when you call 911, whether it's in our county, our service, or whether it's in this county, Durango Fire and Rescue, not being there, or not being as readily available. We don't fund fire that way. We don't bill you when the fire department shows up at your house to put fire out, but somehow the payment system relies on you to call 911 for us to pick you up and us to bill you for that ambulance service. So we have to figure out in healthcare, how do we fund the things that are the fixed costs for a small community or a large community? How do we fund the things that keep people well so that we don't have a high demand of burden on the healthcare system and we're just living better lives? And then how do we fund the variable things that are not urgent emergent, like I'd like my knee operated on, or I'd like something else done that I have to do today and I can defer to a time that's a little more convenient. And those are 3 very different pieces, and you wrap behavioral health into that mix and it gets even more complicated. So it's not easy, there's a lot of work to do, but we can't think about all of that as one funding structure and think we're gonna be successful.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing is that, I agree. I think the other thing is that your question is a really good one, because I don't think this is a Colorado issue, right? This is a national issue. And the economists in the room probably have this data better than I do, but at one point there was a statistic I saw that like we're 47th in health outcomes, but we spend more than any other country, and 70% of our GDP goes to healthcare, but yet we have these very nagging issues that people don't have access and we don't have good food, and we have all these things. So really there's a national crisis that's coming in the healthcare space, I believe. And I think there are solutions to it, but we have got to stop evaluating every single event that's happening as if it is an event, because to me, I think we're in a different era and our solutions need to be focused with that perspective and era perspective. How do we change the era that we're in, not address each event as it's happening in our community or to us? Because I think it's going to be bigger than just us.
What's an example? What's an example? What you would do at a event?
Well, I think if we think about workforces, it's an era problem. We need a pipeline that Megan is starting in 9R with high school students trying to remove the interest in people wanting to join healthcare as a noble profession, right? Those are the words of my friend Joe Guy. We had coffee one day and he said, how do we go back to healthcare as a noble profession? That's where we have to start. So we have to start pipeline work now with students to say, this is incredibly rewarding, important work. And oftentimes it looks very different in practice because of regulation than what you thought you were going to do when you got there, right? So I think we just have to think about, what does workforce look like? How do we get a pipeline started? How do we then recruit? How do we then retain? And how do we have people have rewarding careers in healthcare that last longer than 3 to 5 years? That to me is, to solve those things, we need to be thinking about it as a systemic solution across a period of time with a longitudinal perspective of success, not just what can I do today.
I think to answer the last question, what can you do as employers? Don't take our examples. Healthcare workers are the worst users of healthcare services. We don't do it until it's acute, because we do a lot of drive-by medicine. But encourage your employees, your friends, your neighbors to start early. That annual visit to your primary care. I know you're laughing, you're probably saying, I don't have a primary care, go find one. If you can start those things early and you can address the pre-diabetes before you're in full-blown, diabetic crisis, if you can do a lot of those things to really minimize the impact of that long-term health crisis, we will see a healthier population. And it's not just physical health, it's mental health. Colorado may be one of the fittest states. It has one of the worst mental health rankings in the entire US. And, to Brandon, it's a lot of those highs and lows. And so it's not just go to your PCP to, ensure that your lab values look good and there's no concerns, you're not predisposed to anything, but it's also to take care of your mental health and to have grace with each other, that we're all facing these challenges and we're all hopefully going in the same direction and we're not all going to get it right the first time.
Mario Martinez, Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Fort Lewis College, and I wanted to build off the comment, Shelley, I talked about last night at the reception, and with regards to workforce pipeline. And my comment is really more of an invitation. We are very committed at Fort Lewis College to workforce, and we understand that the way to do that is in partnership with our industry partners. We are working on credentialing programs, and we know that we have to do that with our faculty and our industry experts. And so my comment is really an invitation to reach out to us, and I'll reach out to you, because we believe that this is the long game. And it's not only credential programs, but it's helping translate our academic programs, our four-year degree programs, into skills and competencies that you need. But we can only do that in partnership with you. And so I'm just excited about this panel and the discussion that's happening, particularly on the workforce and staff side, because really our students and our faculty are very interested and passionate about working in their communities and in Durango in this region. And so those are all assets that we have to offer, and we can only do it in partnership with you. But we've already started the ball rolling. We've got credential programs in process. In January or February, we're going to test case a medical assistant following certification program as an example. And we believe that small steps are the way to get to it. So I just invite you all to have a conversation with me or with somebody here at Fort Lewis so that we can get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Mario. I think that's really helpful. And Joe and I talked about healthcare administration leadership being something that also people come out of school with great business administration, but that's not necessarily healthcare administration. So the partnership with the Ford around the nursing program, we have public community college as well, who's interested in trying to help look at stackable credentials and certificate programs. There's a lot of interest you're going to find on this panel of working with you in our community to try and create some workforce solutions. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of jobs that people can have, while they're going to school. As Megan mentioned, people start our careers working as an EMT, while you're studying, going to class, working as an EMT, drawing blood, answering phones, scheduling, reaching out to the payers and, I'll stop there. So yes, happy to work with them.
More else that we've got, a number of elected officials and others that hold some purse strings, and I think this is a great place to make an investment. It stretches beyond Fort Lewis and the community college into the work that Karen's doing, Jessica and others around workforce pipelining and bringing the right funds to the right place at the right time. I think can really help solidify that. The dollars don't always have to come to us as the employer, but if we can partner with the funder or with the education system with the employer, I think we've got a lot of doors to open.
Okay, so that is an awesome lead in right to this question. So when we're talking with high school kids, right, because we can import talent becomes harder and harder because people with housing, at least the students that are in schools right now, have some kind of connection to housing for at least a small period. I think Joe knows about this, maybe Brandon, we had, according to U Science, over 900 kids in middle and high school who have an interest in healthcare and might have the disposition to that. So if we were going to give advice right now
to our high school kids who are interested in healthcare, what advice would you give them thinking about planning for the future in a healthcare field, especially we want them to be in ones that can make a living wage? So what would be your advice to us as leaders in this region with education, these preschool through 12th grade, and then also just for those schools, those students and their families themselves? What's the advice?
Jump in first. Thanks, Dr. Chester. I think the first piece is there's a wide array of services. You know, people, hear healthcare and they immediately think, physician, or nurse. And so knowing that, you can start off working as a phlebotomist to draw blood, you can, learn so many different pieces of healthcare early on, to continue to grow, in time. When you look at, work, there's a lot of industries, you talk about AI and others that, people are worried about, okay, am I gonna have a job in the next 20 years? If you work in healthcare, you'll have a job in the next 20 years. So, that's the other advantage as well too. But I think just going in with open eyes as well too, saying the healthcare that is today is going to be different than it is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's one of the big things that I've shared as I've talked to our Mercy, employees. I said, while there's, some health competition, with each of the different hospitals in the community, in a lot of ways, we're competing against Mercy at 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. People constantly come to me and say, well, it's not the way, that this was 10 years ago. It's, well, unfortunately, that's just the healthcare industry, across the board. So just being aware of that as you look at those.
If I were talking to a student, Shelley's heard me say it, healthcare is a noble profession. This is where we're caring for our friends and our family. It's personal. There's becoming fewer and fewer industries, especially as we're starting to work remotely or, distant from our colleagues, where you're truly part of changing somebody's life and you can see that impact. And so if there's a student that is interested in feeling that sense of fulfillment and purpose, then my next piece of advice would be get started early. There are so many doors to enter into healthcare. I was at a chamber meeting a couple weeks ago and somebody said, what's the hardest job for you to recruit for at the moment? And that week in particular, we were closing our cafeteria earlier because we didn't have enough food service workers. So in addition to a healthcare facility, we're running a hotel. So if you are interested in hospitality work, but want it to be noble, think about working in healthcare in our hospitality industry. We run a restaurant. We're serving people. We're not just delivering medication, but we're providing nutrition to patients who are admitted and to our own staff. We're feeding each other every day in the hospital. And so there's so many professions. The IT space in healthcare is super exciting. And so as a high school student, if you're interested in IT and AI and those things, come spend a day in a hospital and see how we're leveraging technology to improve workflow and care. Supply chain management, we're buying stuff, inventorying it, trying to figure out how much we need on our shelf versus how much we get tomorrow. So there's a whole supply chain side. We do finance, payroll, HR, all those things. So if there's a student that's unsure of what they think their profession wants to look like, starting early exploring healthcare helps them decide what they may not want to do. Where if you went into other industries, you may not get exposure to all that work that's happening that's not at the bedside, in addition to the work that's being done at the bedside. It's a great place to explore careers at a young age.
I would agree with both of you and echo the start early. The number one thing we hear from young people today is they want a career, they want a profession where they can make a difference. And I can't think of another profession where you can make a greater difference in someone's life than healthcare. And the team-based atmosphere that exists in the healthcare system is really powerful. And I think getting back to making healthcare a noble profession is really a goal that we should all share, because it does meet that criteria, and it is, as I said, something that we're all going to need at some point, whether we like it or not. And so I would say for our young people who are considering it, dive in, see if it's right for you, but if you really want to make a difference, I think healthcare is a powerful opportunity for that.
Like Josh mentioned, all of the laws that have been passed in Colorado recently. Do you have any idea how much that costs
Jim, thanks for asking, brings one of our board members himself. He actually asked me this question, not too long ago, and it's really hard to quantify. I'll give a really specific example. This is not doing anything now, but one of the benefits we offer our employees is an extended illness pay. So it's like a sick leave in addition to their paid time off. The state of Colorado, well-intended, put in a family leave benefit for all employees with a handful of exceptions a couple of years ago, and that's starting to take effect this year. Those two benefits are not stackable on top of each other. They're separate and distinct. Our extended illness is a richer benefit than the state's, but we now have the responsibility to both educate our employees about both those benefits, what they are, why they're different, how you apply for both. If the employee applies for the state benefit, they're not concurrently eligible for ours. The state benefit pays less than ours. Who do you think our employee is going to be mad at? When we pay our benefit, we pay it in our normal payroll cycle. We have no idea when the state's actually going to pay that benefit to our employee. So we have somebody that goes out sick, takes advantage of a really great benefit that the state's offering that not all employers have. The employee doesn't get paid, they can't make rent, they're mad at us. Now they leave our employment to go somewhere else because they think we've done something wrong. All the while, we had a benefit that was richer than what the state's compelling us to offer. What's the cost of that? I don't know. I mean, I know what our payroll tax cost is because we pay in as an employer. I don't know what my HR time is going to be. I don't know what the cost of turnover is going to be. All because we have a really well-intended benefit that's regulated when we already had a richer benefit that we did out of the caring for the people that work for us. So that's just an example of one regulation, a law that was passed 2 years ago, I believe, that's only taking effect in 2024 that we yet don't know how much it's going to impact us as an employer who is already doing well by our employees.
I think your question's a really great one, and it actually, it's the question we should all be asking, right? It's the right question to ask, because the problem with legislation is people don't ask those questions before they enact the legislation. And that when Josh talks about 370 odd bills all impacting healthcare coming at us in wave after wave after wave, they're well intended, but there's no actual pause to say, what's it going to take to implement this? What's this going to undo? What is this going to course correct for? And then, of course, having been in healthcare for 23 years, where's my anguish and pain and suffering component of all this legislation? Because that has a cost too, right? As you try to look at all of this stuff, your teams are constantly, are we doing this now? What's next? How do we change this? So there has to be a reckoning in terms of, let's be thoughtful about changes we want to make, and let's give them some time to be able to be implemented thoughtfully, and then let's watch what happens before we start to initiate the next round of changes, because that seems to be the environment, the washing machine that we're in.
We tried to quantify a couple of years ago the impact of new regulation in Colorado. It's really difficult for some of the reasons that have been on here. I'm going to pivot your question to ask the question to what end? And it's a question that I often ask our policymakers. And I'll give an example. Last year, there was a bill moving through the legislature to increase transparency on hospitals in Colorado. A noble goal, right? And then something that I think we support. But when you went down the data points the State Department was looking for, they already had most of the data, they just didn't know it. We're submitting that data already. And when we pointed out the fact that they had the data and they weren't doing anything with it, we asked, what was the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? And it's a constant challenge that I think we face. But to what end are we enacting all of these? And it comes back to the example I shared earlier. We can either spend, $150,000 or so with salary and benefits on a nurse to go to the bedside, or we can hire someone to fill out an Excel spreadsheet. And what is our goal, and what are we achieving with that new requirement? And I think we have tipped too far toward these kind of well-intentioned but maybe not fully thought out requirements that are being imposed on the healthcare system, but it's adding up. And Shelley shared last night, she's like, I have spreadsheets to keep track of spreadsheets. That is not, in my opinion, an efficient use of her time, her resources, or her team's resources, when those resources could otherwise be reinvested in the patient.
I think the other thing that we miss is there are so many changes and so many contradictions that we become reactionary. And so we don't have the time, we don't have the resources to get out in front of it and say, okay, how are we going to implement this? It's basically like, oh, we're a month behind and we better get on it, or we've done everything to check all the boxes and now you're having an audit, and then you're gonna have an audit of the audit. And then if you're lucky, you're done, but maybe in 3 years, they're gonna come audit those audit results. And so how do you keep track and allow healthcare to focus on the people problems and not the paper problems that we're starting to see become a true burden for us?
So I have a quick, well, probably not a quick question, although I have to be quick because we only have 3 minutes. So it's twofold and it kind of wraps into what you're talking about. One is, you know, for a long time in healthcare, people have been asking for transparency. And so I just like an update on where we are with legislation and where we are in your worlds with transparency. And then the second question I have is, the insurance companies create a burden on the healthcare system. That's obvious because they create a burden on the patient, and it's obvious how much of a burden the insurance companies create for the hospitals. So it's great to have insurance, it's great to have insurance companies, but from what I've seen in the work that I've done in healthcare in the last 10 years in this area, is that, I mean, there's independent physicians in hospitals that have people on the phone with insurance companies for hours and hours and hours. You can't go see a physical therapist unless you get the insurance company to approve that you get to have some extra, you know, time with a physical therapist, being based on what they want. And I'm just curious, like, where are we with legislation tying those two things together with transparency with insurance companies? Like, what are they being held accountable to in terms of our world and your world?
Yes. We have both at the state and federal levels passed dozens of transparency measures in recent years. I go back to the question I asked before. To what end? Understanding the financial circumstances of our hospitals and health systems in Colorado, I think is a really helpful data point to understand the financial health of our healthcare system. We have that transparency, it's out there. The annual report will be coming out in 6 days. And it will show much of what I showed you here today, the challenges that we experience. We also now have negotiated contract rates out there from insurance companies and hospitals. That is more difficult. That requires the patient to go out and analyze the data and shop. And healthcare is, ideally, you would be able to shop for services, but it's really difficult to shop for the best price if you bleed or you're in an emergency situation. Healthcare is just different. And so it always comes back to what end. But where we're at with legislation and regulations and requirements, so we have, hospitals are now required to post their prices. We now have 3 penalty mechanisms at the state level and 1 at the federal level if you get an Excel field wrong. You can be sued. You can be under sanctions from the State Department, and the AG can file a claim against you. At the federal level, there are financial penalties for non-compliance. So we, again, to Megan's point and the point that's been raised earlier, we've gone all the way, the pendulum has swung all the way over here. But it's actually not helping patients a great deal. As far as transparency on insurers, there are components at the federal level around the insurance companies. But none of it's meeting the mark. None of it's making it easier, which is why you know, our goal this year is to make it just a little bit easier on patients. That should, like, our lodestar as an industry should and is, I believe, what's best for patients in Colorado. But from a policy perspective, I don't believe we've been hitting the mark for some time.
Good. All right, and we have time for one more question. I know there were several hands up, so I apologize. We've had a very patient questioner waiting here.
Thank you. As one who has lived here a long time, I remember when we had a hospital district and I retired from healthcare. So now I'm on the other end. And in my last Medicare book, it had tiny letters that said that telehealth would no longer be approved for Medicare. In a community that the bulk of our county, 2/3 of it, lives outside of Durango. And we already know we're at risk for several things. How is that going to impact, or am I totally, did I read that wrong? Is it not such a concern as I'm feeling it very well? And I thank you for each of you for what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're seeing. I know from our end, you know, we continue to focus on how we can continue to build, you know, telehealth services, you know, as an area of focus. The challenge that you have is, you know, broadband services, you know, cable going out and things like that as well too, but, yeah, I don't know, Josh, you may know more than me on that.
We may need to chat a little bit more after this. Do you by chance have a Medicare Advantage plan?
Yes.
So, for those of you who don't know, Medicare Advantage is privately administered Medicare program. And it represents about 50% of all Medicare coverage in the country. What we've seen in recent years is Medicare Advantage plans are becoming more restrictive than traditional Medicare for providers, for access. So I have a hospital in Colorado that 100% of the claims that they submit to a Medicare Advantage plan have been denied. And then they have to fight, and they get about 75 to 80% of those overturned. But going back to the administrative challenge of working with insurance companies, Medicare Advantage is one of the biggest offenders rate. Also, reimburses less than traditional Medicare for the rural hospitals. So it's having a detrimental impact on our rural communities as far as the affordability and accessibility of healthcare. In traditional Medicare, I think telehealth, we've actually had some pretty big wins in broadening access to telehealth services, which is, as you pointed out, is essential in rural Colorado, particularly those of you who have to drive over a mountain pass to access your healthcare services. But I think this one's coming to a head pretty soon, because Medicare Advantage, while I think initially thought to be a way to generate some cost savings in the healthcare system, is actually having a detrimental impact on health.
Please, Amy, on that. Let's say some, give it Joe. He's got say something.
I'll go back to where I ended my remarks earlier. You all are so fortunate to have these leaders serving your community. I hope you will. We've got a road ahead of us. Give these folks some grace and your partnership as we try to figure out what comes next for healthcare in Colorado. But I hope you recognize how fortunate.
I want to quickly echo Josh though and talk about just mention the fact that all four of you in your capacity are doing so much for our community. So thank you for all that you're doing. Speaking of thank yous, I want to again thank Bank of Colorado for being such an awesome partner and an awesome sponsor to this event. Thank you, everybody. Thank all of you for braving the elements and coming out. I want to point out that not a single person took an eye out on this screen while making their segues. But thank you, happy new year. Again, thank you to physical plant. I don't see anyone from physical plant in here, but for getting the campus ready for us to have a couple hundred people on it. A huge thank you to them. Thank you for all that you do in our community. I apologize to those of you that weren't able to get to ask your questions. We might be able to steal a few minutes before we go have some food. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Oh, gee, you want to change the whole phone system around, we're bringing balls to the. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also like just trade the video, they're more like a transition. Yeah. Sorry.
Party's on.
Awesome, as always.
Oh, thanks.
Good time. He's not kicking around, man. Okay. So there were two different agendas on the right one that I scanned, and then there was the big one. I scanned up. This 18. Say hi to Alan. Yeah. All right, thank you. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah.